Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Protector of the Fairies in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Protector of the Fairies. Sickness in the darkness. You'll be alright, Ziraf said as he looked down at his brother. The boy, his features distorted and corrupted by blurs, merely tried to smile in response, but all it resulted in was a harsh coughing fit. Panicking, Ziraf quickly brought the fresh water he had collected to his brother's mouth, some of it spilling from the cup in his haste. It did the trick though, helping soothe his brother's pain if only momentarily. His little brother wasn't getting better. With every day that passed he got worse and worse, and all he could do was grab at straws, desperately trying to help reduce the pain and cure the symptoms. But he was no doctor. His knowledge was rudimentary at best. Maybe if he could get access to some proper medical texts he could find an answer, but the nearest library was days away, even by horse, and the roads weren't exactly safe these days. Bandits and raiders ruled those outcrops, only suppressed through a literal use of force. They were a small village though, and didn't come close to having the manpower to spare on such a thing. They just had enough to defend themselves from an attack and hoped for the best everywhere else. It made merchants and other travelers a rare sight in these parts as a result. No one wanted to travel to a far-out place like this unless they had reason to or had the numbers to do so. It had meant it had taken 2 weeks for him to finally get help from the local doctor, as he had been away traveling with a convey to one of the neighboring villages in order to restock some of his ingredients that were less common to the area and harder to come by. Travel to the village was only a day away by foot, but the regular problems still persisted, and a lone traveler like him would have been attacked without hesitation. It was only now that the doctor had gotten back with a group of merchants looking to sell their leftover stock that he had gotten back, and the second he had heard, he had rushed to the doctor's house and not stopped banging on the door until he answered. That hadn't been a quick task either. He was the village demon. The cursed child who simply wouldn't die no matter how hard they tried. No one wanted to associate with him, and no one wanted to even be seen near him. Simply being in the village right now was dangerous enough, as it would only take a single man or woman, having a bad day, to see him and decide that the best way to get over it would to take it out on him. He would live from whatever they did, he always did, but it would be time wasted that could be used trying to help his brother. Eventually, however, the doctor had answered. It had taken hours, him begging at the doorway till his voice felt raw, as he knew it never could wear out, and by the time the door finally opened the sun had set, leaving the town dimly lit by the weak flames of torches scattered across the main streets. The man hadn't said a word when he gestured for him to lead on. He hadn't needed to respond either, noticing the medical bag the man had slung over his shoulder. They hadn't been alone though. A girl, not much older than he was, had followed behind. She was either the man's daughter or his apprentice from what he assumed, likely both, going by their similar appearances and the small medical bag of her own. Unlike the doctor's, hers was tiny, strapped to her waist like a belt, with herbs and bandages just barely visible from the odd piece sticking out. Getting the two past his parents was difficult, to say the least. His brother had been like this for weeks now, and they hadn't even considered approaching the doctor even when the doctor had still been in town. Unlike him, they would have at least been admitted on arrival, even if they did get denied. Though considering it was his brother that was the one who was sick, he likely would have been treated anyway. But instead they had ignored the issue, laughing every time his brother had stumbled to the floor or passed out in a hallway and then gone back to drinking, just like they always did. They had essentially shoved the matter onto him, not that he minded too much. He loved his brother unlike them, so it was only right he should care for him. However, he was still a child himself. There were things he could not do, and his own reputation made some things impossible. If they could make it to a village far away from here, then everything would be fine, but he still needed a few more years before they both would be able to travel and avoid bandits safely. For now though, he just had to focus on getting his brother help. After arriving at their home, and ignoring his parents who were passed out drunk on the floor in the other room, the doctor had done a quick inspection of his brother before he had retreated back out of the room and started messing with the contents of his medical bag. He could only hope the doctor knew what this was and could cure his brother, else he would be running out of options. "You're a bit different from what the adults say," the girl beside him stated. He did his best to ignore her as he continued to watch over his brother. Ever since they had arrived and he had started watching over his brother, she had gotten rather chatty. Too chatty for his liking. She had revealed though that it was her that had finally persuaded her father to help him, or rather to help his brother, and he was grateful to her for that. He just wished she would shut up for a bit. The girl seemed to pout at him as he refused to answer, her blue eyes glaring at him as she placed her hands on her hips. Did she think that was going to work? She tilted his head at him when he still refused to respond, her short blonde hair shifting slightly before she turned to his brother instead. Carefully crouching down beside him, doing her best to smooth the creases she made in her knee-length dress, she watched his brother's state carefully, gaining the same look her father had when he had examined his brother. He's pretty bad, I think. Daddy looked worried, and some of these symptoms look familiar to me. I think I read about them in a book last week. He looked worried? What makes you think that? The girl turned to him with a smile for a moment. You spoke again. His glare immediately forced that smile from her face though. Sorry. Doesn't matter. About your father. Oh. Yeah, when he's worried about a patient his eyes get this strained look in them. People don't really notice it, I've found, but his eyes aren't nearly as emotional normally. Daddy doesn't really show his emotions too often. Despite the girl's words, she didn't seem too upset about that. He guessed she had just grown used to her father's quirks and that he probably showed his love in different, more subtle ways. But if the man was showing emotion now, what did that mean for his brother? Was he really that bad? He felt a hand land on his leg, his head turning to find the girl smiling at him reassuringly. I'm sure it'll be fine. Daddy is the best. Even the other doctors we've visited say so. He'll heal your brother. Ziref could only nod at her words, desperately hoping they would be true. A small cough at the doorway drew his eyes back there, the doctor waving him forward with one hand. Carefully getting himself off the floor, he noticed how the girl didn't follow. She must have seen the motion, so he assumed that this must mean the doctor wanted to speak with him alone. Following after the man, the doctor led the two of them outside, standing just beside the doorway and letting the faint light from the candles in the house give them light. The doctor let out a sigh as he leaned across the wall, pulling a pipe out from his long brown coat and lighting it up. The pipe was quite a fancy one from what he could see, an elegantly crafted horse etched into the end with strange other patterns covering the wood. It must have cost the man a pretty penny to buy, but then he was a doctor. Money was always less tight for such sought-after individuals, and sometimes even goods like this could be used to pay for services. The man took a minute to just stand there, holding the pipe carefully with one hand and bringing it to his mouth a few times. His blue eyes, the same shade as his daughter's, seemed tense, and he could see the strained look they had in them now that it had been pointed out to him. With his free hand he used it to run it through his blonde locks, his hair tied back behind him in a long ponytail, stretching down to his waist. I'll be blunt to you, the man finally said, turning his head to face him. I don't like you, and I know your reputation. If it wasn't for my daughter I wouldn't even be here, but she appealed to my conscience. You may be dangerous, but your brother has yet to show anything like that. That's why I finally agreed to help him, not you. Ziref nodded. He expected as much. His brother was innocent. His brother was pure. He wasn't. Raising his pipe to his mouth again, the doctor paused before lowering it regretfully. It's serious, I'm afraid. I've encountered this a few times in the past. It's a pretty nasty virus. If found within a few days it can be stopped before it sets, but once the victim starts collapsing it's too late for normal medicine. The man continued to say more, but Ziref wasn't listening. It was like his world had suddenly shattered before his eyes, everything else deaf to him. His brother was going to die? No. No. He couldn't die. Not his brother. Anyone else but his brother. He felt his hands gripping his arms tightly, the pain in his head becoming too much to bear. He could already feel the flicker of magic around his body, that cursed power beginning to appear, but for once he didn't care. All he could see in his mind was his brother dying. A stinging pain hit his cheek before his eyes snapped to the source. The doctor's hand was held out to one side, a furious look on his face before he spoke in a cold voice. Listen to me when I'm talking. Modern medicine can't save your brother, but that doesn't mean he will die. Ziref froze, the words sinking into his mind. His brother wouldn't die? That's better. I'm helping you, despite my own opinions on the matter. But if you kill my daughter with that curse of yours, I will never rest until I kill you. And if I can't kill you, then I'll settle for making you suffer for the rest of my life. Is that clear? Ziref nodded, choosing not to point out how the man himself would have likely died from his power before his daughter did. The man, happy his message had sunk in, continued with what he was saying now that the curse was back under control. I'm unaware of how much you know about magic, but you at least know it exists, right? Your cursed state is likely a result of something from that area. Maybe even from a magic god your parents pissed off in their foolishness. However, my experiences have let me see a bit more magic than just your death-related stuff. Magic of the elements, magic to create objects of all shapes and sizes, but what you care about is this. Magic to heal. Magic to heal? His knowledge on magic was limited, but he had always believed that such magic did exist somewhere out in the world. It had to, if only to counteract his magic that took away life. And this can help my brother? He found himself asking, hope in his voice. The man shrugged after a moment though, a grimace across his face. I don't know if I'm being honest. I'm not very knowledgeable on magic. Never saw much reason to learn much on something I had no talent for. My wife, she knew a bit about magic and had the talent but never found a teacher. But her interest was enough to let me know a few tidbits. Taking a moment to think, the man looked into the distance at the faint lights from the town, barely visible at all at this distance. She is the one who told me about healing magic. Even had me take her on day trips around some of the places we visited after my work was finished before she died giving birth to our daughter. She wanted to help me, I liked to think, but didn't want to admit it out loud, especially as she couldn't normally understand half the stuff I did when I was working. Snapping out of memory, the doctor turned back to Ziref. I'll say this. Ordinary healing magic likely won't help you here. Basic healing magic is just a bit more advanced than ordinary medicine. Faster too, but that doesn't matter if it can't cure the problem. If you are truly serious about saving your brother's life, you either need to find someone who knows the more advanced stuff and is willing to help, or find a way to learn it yourself. The idea was sound, Ziref would admit it. But there was one major flaw in such an idea. I can't. If I leave, my brother won't last a week here. I noticed, the doctor muttered, taking a deep breath and looking like he was about to regret what he was going to say. I'll help you. God, that's a foul taste in my mouth. Help. The word sounded foreign even to Ziref's ears. He knew what it meant and what it implied. People had helped one another many times in his line of sight, and it normally involved working together to try and kill him. It was a word that held the meaning of one person offering assistance to another. Which was why it was also so foreign to him. No one had ever offered him help before. Not even his brother, though his brother had the excuse of being a state where he could barely help himself, let alone another. So for someone to offer him such a thing. Why? The doctor scoffed, turning away from him. I feel sorry for your brother, and if I don't at least try and help him, he'll die and my daughter will get mad at me. He'll need constant care to keep his condition stable too, and this will provide my daughter some real-world experience for the future when she takes over from me. I'm not doing this for you, the doctor repeated. I'll do it for your brother. If he's with us, we can keep him stable for around 2 to 3 years. I doubt your parents will care, they probably won't even notice, and I should warn you that your brother will suffer. I can only relieve some pain and halt the symptoms from getting worse for a time, not cure it altogether. In that time though, you might be able to find what you are looking for to save him. This won't be for free either, the man added, putting his pipe back in his pocket before crossing his arms. I want you gone. You'll be out of our hands for a few years just doing this task, but I want you gone permanently. The moment your brother is safe, I want you to leave this village and never return. Take him with you too if you want, I don't mind, so long as you leave. Be someone else's problem. It's not like we can kill you to get rid of you. Ziref considered the request carefully. It wasn't completely unexpected. He even wanted to leave in the future too, and during this time until then he might even be able to find some kind of magic alongside healing magic that would allow him and his brother to travel safely. But he still held doubts. 2 to 3 years? That's a wide margin for error. Then get back here as quickly as you can if you don't like it. I can only make a rough estimate of how long he'll last. Some people last 2 years, some 3, and some anywhere in between. If his will to see you again is strong enough, he may be able to hold on long enough, but if you don't want to take the risk, then be careful and get back sooner rather than later. It would have to do. Any chance was better than no chance. Deal, he said quietly. I'll leave in a few minutes. I just need to gather up anything I need and say goodbye. The man waved him off as he headed back inside, heading back to the room his brother was lying in. He found his brother just where he had left him, only he seemed more comfortable than before. The girl from before was holding his hand in hers, and there was a small sheet placed on his forehead too. The look on his brother's face was far more peaceful than before, so much so he almost feared he was dead for a second until he saw the up and down movements of his brother's chest. Look after him, he said simply to the girl. There was no point bothering his brother now, not when he was in such a peaceful state after suffering for days on end, and simply seeing his brother had been enough to solidify his will. He didn't need to grab anything either. Nothing he had was worth anything of value, and food and drink would only be an inconvenience for him if he couldn't find anything on the journey, nothing more. I'll be back in a few years with a cure for him. You're leaving? Wait, you're leaving now? There was a slight tone of panic in her voice, something he was not used to hearing directed at him out of concern. But it's not safe out there. There are bandits everything at night. Daddy said so. Waiting for transport could take days, he replied. I'll get there quicker myself. And it's not like I have anything to fear of bandits when I'm alone. I can't die. They can. It's that simple. It really was. If it wasn't for his brother, he could have left whenever he wanted. But his magic wasn't selective from what he knew so far. He could kill any and all bandits who attacked him when it chose to activate, as it was a bit of a fickle magic to count on, but that would also kill his brother in the process, something he could not allow to happen. Take good care of him, he said softly. He's my precious little brother. He doesn't deserve any of this. The girl looked at him for a moment before nodding. I will. What's his name? Hashtag 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 hashtag. Hashtag 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 L. The name sounded weird in his head for some reason. From the look on the girl's face, she had understood him perfectly, and yet the name eluded him. He knew it, and yet he couldn't hear it, just like he knew with one glance that the boy lying there looked like his brother, despite being unable to see his brother's appearance with his eyes or access it in his mind. He couldn't think much on that though. The girl was saying something and he snapped back into reality to hear it. That's my name, she said, her first words having been missed to him. Anna Hartfilia. Then I trust him in you and your father's capable hands. Keep him safe. Beginning to leave, he tried to ignore the headache he was getting, a voice speaking louder and louder in his mind, saying a single word on repeat. Just who was this Ichigo? Ichigo's eyes snapped open, his focus snapping towards the one shaking his shoulder and saying his name. He let out a smile of relief when he noticed who it was, Toshiro, looking down at him in concern. This would have been far more of a pain if it had been Kisuke trying to wake him up. Toshiro. You're looking better. I wish I could say the same to you, Toshiro replied, looking at him in concern. Are you all right? You look tired. I'm fine. That's a terrible lie, you realize. Ichigo's smile faded slightly as Toshiro continued to watch him, the concern he showed never vanishing. Sorry. Just dealing with some stuff. Makes it hard to sleep. You were doing it quite well there. Except I didn't appear quite comfortable with my dreams, Ichigo finished for his old student. Even when I don't have nightmares these days, my dreams aren't pleasant ones. It'll get better. Once this war ends. You sure you'll be fine until then? Probably, Ichigo replied with. It wasn't an outright lie, but he was pretty sure Toshiro didn't believe him anyway. It doesn't affect my performance anyway. So long as I can heal, I can restore myself. Physical exhaustion isn't much of a problem, and I can delay sleep for a while. Even when I do need to rest, merely resting like that does help my mental exhaustion, even if the dreams aren't the most pleasant. If you're sure. He could tell Toshiro wanted to press him for more, but he was glad he didn't. Taking the outstretched hand, he let Toshiro help pull him to his feet, briefly stretching to get feeling back in his body. Is it my watch now? Kisuke wouldn't let me take first. He mentioned that. Said something along the lines of you being likely to ignore the rota and spend the whole night up if you went first. Everyone needs to rest sometimes. Even you. We'll have to disagree a bit there, Ichigo muttered under his breath before quickly looking Toshiro over. You seem different. I do. A bit tougher really. It was true, Toshiro did look tougher than before. Not physically, though his hair was longer and messy than before. But mentally. The way Toshiro stood, the way he kept an eye on the area around them even while relaxed like he expected an enemy to pop out at any time, it was clear the war left its impression on him out here in the wild. I'm glad to see you're okay though. I was worried myself for a while that I wouldn't be, admitted Toshiro. You all arrived but for a time I was worried Karen wouldn't make it. That worried me a lot mostly. And then when all did show up I was worried that you might not be able to stop the hollows before the barrier fell. If you had all been a second later at arriving when you did, I would be dead now. Thank you. Don't mention it, Toshiro. We're friends. We wouldn't have let you die. Karen thought you might still have left us. Ichigo didn't say anything. Would you have? I don't know, Ichigo replied. I like to think I wouldn't do that, but if there was a guarantee you wouldn't be harmed and I wasn't able to get there in time. The situation doesn't always call for me to do what I want. Sometimes I have to do what's best, and it can be hard. But when your lives are on the line I don't even consider that. It's why Juoshiro doesn't know we're out here and why I'm having to hide my presence. This is risky but I couldn't just stay put in a time like this. That's a relief to hear at least, replied Toshiro calmly. I think Karen is still a bit annoyed at you for leaving Yuza with Wiwak. She's calmed down a bit over this past month but we're so close now and she wants to do something, right? Yeah. It's been hard to stop her sometimes. She's smart but she's also stubborn, like you. When she knows her sister is so close to her and that she can't do anything about it, it infuriates her. Sometimes even makes her want to throw it all away and just charge head first at them since that would be better than doing nothing in her mind. Can't blame her for that, Ichigo muttered. Waiting is the hardest, especially when your goal is so close. Tell her she doesn't have to worry for much longer though. We're preparing for an assault on Waiwaka's base as we speak anyway. Juoshiro is pulling some strings to help move some people around quietly. Since Waiwak knows what we did with Ziref we have to be careful so he doesn't realize we are doing the same as back then. Do you think we'll be able to take his base? How did it go with Ziref's? We won. Technically. You won't know this but Ziref's army has been crippled in a big way. Their demons aren't being replenished which leaves their numbers under threat when being crushed between us and Waiwaka's Quincy. But the fight itself was hard won. Laxus underwent some changes, let's call them. And Levi, she's. Ichigo trailed off, causing Toshiro to think the worst. She's not dead, is she? He asked fearfully. She can't be. Luckily a shake of Ichigo's head dismissed those fears. She's still alive, though I'd hardly call her that right now. Her body is in stasis. We can't take her out of it or she'll die because no one we can reach can heal her fast enough. We need Wendy to even have a chance at saving her life. And that's why you've been preparing to strike at Waiwak, Toshiro concluded. You were able to leave the others briefly because they were safe but now you need them back. You're not launching an assault but a rescue mission. It's technically both, Ichigo pointed out. When the Quincy make their final push on Ziref's forces, that's when we'll strike. It's the best chance we'll ever get really since after that Waiwak will begin consolidating his new power base. We have to strike while the opening is still there. I'll do whatever I can to help, offered Toshiro. When the time comes, both Karen and I will be there to help. I doubt you could keep Karen away even if you tried. She won't be the only one wanting to go. My dad knows she's missing and hasn't said anything else on it but I know he's desperate to get her back. I wouldn't be surprised if he forced Juoshiro's hand in some way to let him leave for the mission. Probably. Glancing back away from Ichigo, he asked, can you beat him? Waiwak I mean. I know you have a plan and all for him, but you're worried. Yes, Toshiro admitted. If you need help, I'll be more than willing to do my best and assist you. My Bankai has become much stronger in the time you've been gone. Even in the Grand Magic Games I never showed its full power off, and I never had the time while I was fighting the dragons. It would have burnt through my magic too quickly. But against one man, I can use all its power without care if it means helping you stop him. Ichigo gave him a smile before shaking his head. I appreciate the sentiments, but it'll be fine. The more people we have, the harder it will be to pull off the plan we have in mind. Plus I think you may be needed elsewhere with that kind of power you are hinting at. Wywak is not the only threat, he's merely the biggest. If you want to help, make sure all of his other Quincy can't interfere when the time comes. That will be the best way you can help me. All right. If that's what you think it best. It is, Ichigo said as he got to his feet. Now you go get some rest. I'll go and take over the watch and make sure no one sneaks up on us in the middle of the night. Though part of me doubts that. Really, who even knows we're here? Protector of the fairies. I'm fine, Ichigo said as he tried to refuse the food the villagers were giving him to no avail. The mayor had been quite insistent with sharing what little food they had left with the four of them, his reasoning being that they would need the energy to fight if the time came and that they wouldn't need the rest of the food for much longer. He had tried to deny anyway, stating how he didn't need them to worry. He had almost gone on to say how his instant restoration would simply repair any damage that might have been caused by starving himself, but paused right before he could. Stuff like that tended to freak people out or at least make them unsettled, and that was just the reactions of those who knew him. As a result, he was now stuck with a plate of food in front of him like everyone else, feeling guilty that they had given it to him while waiting for the others to show back up. Kisuke had gone for another scout of the perimeter, likely using that as an excuse to inspect the houses of each individual for anything out of the ordinary. They had yet to spot anything that might be a clue to a potential trap, but it was still early in the day. As for Karen and Toshiro, if he remembered correctly, he had seen Karen dragging Toshiro off somewhere and he had left his thoughts at that. They'd be back soon enough, so the least he could do for them all was save their food and wait to eat with them. It's odd, came Mavis's voice, hanging off his shoulder in her invisible state. I figured I would have seen something by now, some sign, but there's nothing. Raising a hand to her head, she began to scratch it in thought. It's just really odd. Maybe there is nothing. Maybe we were being too paranoid. I hope so, Ichigo whispered under his breath, using a hand to rest his head against while covering his mouth. There was no point freaking the villagers out by seeing him talking to no one. Plus it was easier to keep an eye on things if they lacked any knowledge of Mavis's existence. There was no better spy than one you couldn't even perceive. You checked the village hall? The mayor said it had a storage area deep down for supplies. Mavis nodded. Got a good look in there, but there wasn't anything. Just barrels of food and drink. Little else. And you checked all the barrels. What do you take me for? Mavis asked indignantly. Of course I did. But there was nothing. Not one little hint or clue to anything that might be able to be used against us. The most you could do with that stuff would be to give us a bad case of food poisoning, and that's only if they worked really hard with what they have and make something completely unappealing. So it's not the food, Ichigo muttered, grabbing the small apple on his plate and bringing it up to his mouth. It wouldn't matter if he ate a little bit thinking about it, even if he didn't need it. The other villages had been glancing at him too much in the past few minutes and at his untouched food, all the while they were eating theirs, so he could at least put on a small show of eating while he waited for the others. He took a small bit out of it, taking a moment to enjoy the taste, before freezing. Your regeneration activated, stated Mavis, looking between him and the food. I swear they couldn't have poisoned it with what they had. Unless of course someone else put something in that they kept on their person. Knowing it would be safe, Ichigo purposefully swallowed the food, letting his regeneration heal and purge all the damage caused. Bringing his mouth back to his mouth, he spoke quietly and asked, anyone looking upset? None, Mavis muttered back, glancing around from person to person and looking for any signs of joy or disappointment. No one looks like they expected anything to happen at all. At least no one out here does. Maybe it's one of the villagers with the mayor right now down in the basement. Possibly. There was still something odd in his mind. That didn't feel like my magic was recovering from just poison. I thought I felt a trace of magic in there, to be honest. Could have been used to lace the food with something. It would be why I couldn't find anything, and would be better than hiding poison on their person. We wouldn't exactly be able to prove it was them in that case. Even with the weak levels of magical power these villagers have, they still have enough for something low level like that with the right bit of magic involved. Keep an eye out for me a moment. Grabbing a small piece of bread from his plate he got from his makeshift seat and turned away from the villages, walking a few meters away and making it look like he was checking out the distance in case of any enemy attacks. Using his cloak he quickly hid the bread underneath before a small pattern of blue lines burst to life across his hand's skin. The lines slowly stretched onto the bread itself, stretching up before slowly breaking down the bread into tiny pieces of magic. He let the magic fade out of view as he continued to stand in place, taking note of what he had sensed within the bread as he broke it down. Definitely magic, he stated to Mavis quietly. And definitely not weak either. It's subtle, hard to notice, but if you dig deep enough you'll find a decent bit of power beneath it. Not something one of these villagers could do multiple times. Did you get a reading of the magic? Just finishing analyzing the remains and... Got it. Pushing off from Ichigo's shoulder, Mavis floated over towards the other plates, stopping just a few inches away as she reached out towards the food. She stopped just short of touching it though, her head tilting to one side and back as she reached out towards the hidden magic she was sensing. It's a match, she called back out, turning back towards Ichigo and returning to her usual place. Same energy signature in each piece. We'll dealing with either one individual with a decent level of strength or the entire village. The former it a bit more appealing because it means that at least our enemies are limited once they are discovered. Unless they have conspirators. Of course, but I think we want to think some happy thoughts, right? Sighing, Mavis shook her head in annoyance. It's a pain though. We can't be too lax on this. It couldn't harm us, but it could do something to the others. Toshiro and Karen are especially vulnerable, they would be more trusting of the people they risked everything to save. Kisuke meanwhile. He'll be fine, I think. He probably already predicted something like this would happen. We can use this though. Can you track the energy signature? See if we can home in on the source. Give me a few minutes. It's easy to sense in the food, but the connection that exists to the one who cast it is fairly weak. A link does exist, which makes my job easier, but it's hard to follow back when it's like this. Just keep an eye on everyone in case someone notices I'm poking around. Ichigo nodded, leaving her to work as he moved to sit back down. None of the villages seemed to look worried about him yet. Their worry when it was shown was always directed towards the village walls whenever they felt uneasy, but any of them could be getting tense after a failed attempt. The question was who it was. The small signs of movements caught his attention as the mayor reappeared with the few men he had taken with him. Once again they were bringing up supplies, more barrels joining the rest as they cleared out the storage rooms for anything worth taking. None of them looked too concerned as they glanced at him as they passed, nor did they seem to even glance at the partially eaten food on his plate. They just walked past and joined the other villagers, chatting amongst themselves while some settled down to rest or headed out towards their homes to collect belongings. Ichigo. Ichigo's eyes briefly glanced at Kisuke as he returned, a serious look on his face. Got a minute? Sure. I'm just waiting on something, he said as Kisuke sat down beside him, turning his head slightly towards him and making it appear that they were just having a friendly chat rather than the serious one it was meant to be. Speaking quietly he added, the food isn't brilliantly. Got a bit of a usual taste to it. I expected it would, Kisuke replied, his eyes briefly glancing at the villagers as he kept his voice low. I counted the houses here and the number of people. Some of the villagers said some of their friends died in the time before Toshiro and Karen met them, lost forever on expectation missions in search of help. Taking that into account, I checked each house in turn and worked out which belonged to those who died by the state of the house itself. Pausing, Kisuke gave another glance at the villagers again before continuing. As a result, I came to the conclusion that there are 33 men left, 40 women, and 16 children between the ages of 5 and 17. Each house gives away a lot of clues, from its state of upkeep to the belongings inside it to even the type of food they keep stocked and how they store it. The grand total I came to at 89 people. So, there's 90 now. He shot to his feet, not caring of the looks that got sent his way. Which one? He demanded urgently, his gaze flickering from one villager to the next, looking for any he didn't recognize from when he first arrived. It didn't help that their faces had all kind of blurred together and he couldn't remember many of them apart from the mayor himself. Any clue? I've almost got their magical power locked on, hang on a minute. Look for the odd one in the number, Kisuk stated. In a village like this, everyone tends to know everyone. A child is far too obvious, but a man or a woman can be overlooked briefly at a glance. Stay far enough away and if they don't get a good look at you, people will assume you are meant to be there or are someone you recognize but are too far away to work out who. They will be someone trying to stay away from the group, like. Kisuk never finished his words. Ichigo turned to look at him, confused at what had made him pause, only to find Kisuk unmoving, his mouth half open as if he was about to continue speaking but couldn't. It's the one on the far right, another voice stated, coming from behind Ichigo at what would be the other side of where he had been sitting. That same voice made Ichigo and Mavis freeze in place. Thought it wasn't just because of the voice. It was also because everything around them had stopped moving too, and because the whole world seemed to turn gray as it stayed out of sync with the rest of time. He's sneaking away right now if you look closely, the voice continued, a hand pointing forward at the retreating figure and revealing a dark black ring across the speaker's finger as Ichigo began to turn back round. A ring he knew all too well. It's been a while, Abomination, spoke Ziref as Ichigo finished his turn, the man wearing the same type of cloak he was. I would say it has been too long, but a month isn't nearly enough time to recover from being in your presence. 7 years would have been preferable, like before. Oh, this isn't directed at you though, Mavis. It's always a pleasure to see you. Ziref. One blade already being drawn from its sheath, Ichigo prepared to strike at the dark mage before the man himself just raised a finger at Kisuk. Are you sure you want to try anything? You may be able to outrun my magic, but what about him? I can even bring down another army on you right now if you truly wish to fight. You mean you don't wish to fight? I'm pretty sure you want me dead. Wanting you dead and wanting to fight are two entirely different things, stated Ziref as he crossed his arms. All I want from you is one simple thing right now. Just one thing. Frowning, Ichigo hesitantly asked, keeping a strong grip still on his sword. And that is? Why isn't it obvious? I want to talk. Protector of the fairies. Twin abominations. Well? Ichigo asked, continuing to stand opposite the man who was leisurely relaxing in his makeshift seat. What is it that you want? Now there's no need to keep standing. Take a seat. I'm fine. No, I must insist, Ziref shot back, an irritated tone to his voice. Trust me when I say that the sight of you looking down on me like this is infuriating. It's almost enough to make me kill your mentor over here. I'm so close to actual doing it. But continue standing by all means. I certainly won't stop you if you decide to ignore my warnings. Scowling, Ichigo reluctantly did as the man asked, taking a position far enough away from Ziref that he could avoid any surprise attacks, all the while making sure he could see Ziref clearly from where he was. This fine. Much better. Seems even freaks of nature like yourself can listen to simple commands. Ziref frowned for a moment as his gaze shifted upwards, locking eyes with Mavis. She had moved from her usual position on Ichigo's shoulder to now standing on both of them, her arms crossed in front of her chest. I don't care much if you do it, Mavis. You don't annoy me like he does. Mavis didn't say anything, just continuing to look down at him from her elevated position. Fine, just stay there. Turning back away from her, Ziref reluctantly moved his focus back to the one he hated the most. Now then, shall we talk, Abomination? I'd prefer it if you wouldn't call me that. I'm aware, Abomination. But your wants are not my concern, nor are they something I must listen to. Besides, I'm merely stating the facts. If you hate it so much you could always come over here and try and force me to be quiet, though that also may involve Kisukura Hara here being silent forevermore. Get on with it, Ziref, Ichigo demanded impatiently. What do you want? You said you're here to talk, not fight. So what on earth do you want to say to me, of all people? It's simple really. Raising a hand, Ziraf waved it out at the villages nearby, all of them still frozen in place. I heard about your little rescue attempt for this village. I must say I'm surprised you managed it with no loss of life, on their end and yours. Disappointed even, I so would want to watch your reaction when one of your own allies dies because of a decision you made. But ignoring that, while I was surprised, I felt it was lacking something. I mean, look at them all, Ziraf stated. They all are so happy to be rescued. It's subdued while they wait for your friends to return with that airship of yours. It truly is a marvelous sight in itself, but it is there. And they owe it all to you and your friends. Those two sicking lovebirds kept them alive, and then you and the others brought the firepower necessary to win. They will likely never be able to believe they can repay you for what you have done. And that is what I don't like, Ziraf added. Why are you being thanked? You are an abomination, a freak of nature. They should fear you, hate you, despise you. And yet they thank you. That's not right. Not even close. And what do you plan to do about it, huh? Ichigo demanded. Who are you to decide how people should feel about me? I didn't do this for their thanks, but I'm pretty sure it's rare that anyone can despite their savior. Fear maybe, I understand the reactions of those without power to those with too much, but not hate. Ah, but you see, that is because they haven't realized it yet. How far you will go. Smirking, Ziraf slowly got to his feet, taking a step towards Ichigo as he gestured at each villager in turn. Given the reason, I believe you would kill each and every one of them. But you simply don't have the reason yet. You like to pretend you are a protector, someone who shields people from pain, but I see you as only one thing. An abomination. Coming to a stop right before Ichigo, ignoring how the man was ready to move at any sign of danger, he moved his hand so it was now pointing at Ichigo himself. Abominations should never try to protect people because they cannot. There is only one thing they are good at. Destruction. Death. They exist only to cause ruin to others and to tear this world apart through their actions. Because they are monsters, plain and simple. And yet you pretend you can be noble and heroic. Ziraf's smirk dropped, replaced by a furious scowl. Don't make me laugh. Ichigo glared back at him for a moment, neither speaking. And then, what is an abomination to you? Why do you call me that? The scowl dropped, Ziraf's expression morphing into a frown as he took a step back in confusion. What? I'm asking why you call me that. What is the reason? I always believed it was because I was a hybrid. But then Gray hinted that it might be something else. You don't call Acknowledge an abomination and yet you call me it. There has to be some other reason. So what is it? Ziraf took another step away as he composed himself, his arrogant smirk reappearing as he spoke. Why, it's obvious. The name abomination is meant for one that should not exist. It is for one that has perverted the nature of the world with their mere existence. I knew what you were the moment I laid eyes on you. Someone fated to die from the beginning and yet continuing living on as an abomination in the world. I see. Ichigo frowned for a moment before getting to his feet, glaring right back at Ziraf as he did so. So what does that make you? For once Ziraf was left speechless, his mouth half open to utter a response yet unable to voice his thoughts. What you described, Ichigo continued, I'm sure the first person to appear in your head is me. I won't deny it, I was meant to have died as a child. My own power should have killed me in the first week after my birth at the latest. And I lasted months. And after Kisuke's interference, I survived. He once even described the chance of such events occurring was beyond normal comprehension and that my existence was an abnormal one. But you see, when you described an abomination to me right now, I didn't think of me first. I thought of you. Me. Yeah. You. And trust me, that in itself raises a lot of questions in my head. Because for you to hate an abomination such as myself, as you put it, what does that say about your own opinion of yourself as one too? If I didn't know any better, I would say that you hate your own exist. Silence. Snapped Ziraf, flicking signs of black magic bursting to life and vanishing around the man. Ichigo wisely held his tongue, but even that actual had Ziraf growing angrier. You recognize the signs of my death magic even in this form. Just how much have you seen? A bit, Considering what you endured, it's no wonder you hate the world so much. And considering your own views of yourself in these memories, I can actually see it more clearly now. You really do hate your own existence. I really have to ask though. Hardfilia. Ziref scowled. So you've seen that memory already? I have. That girl. Was she related to Lucy? Lucy? Oh, that celestial spirit girl who used up her life to summon the celestial spirit king. The magic around Ziref faded as he focused on a memory not as painful or personal as the ones in his past, his anger dimming for the time being. You would think it would be hard to notice such things, but even after 400 years I knew immediately that she was Anna's descendant. She was a kind woman and helped me with something precious. She may have grown to despise me as time passed, but I still owed her a small debt for what she did for me as a child. Or at least what she tried to do for me. Let me guess. Your brother. The glare returned, Ziref staying silent for a moment before turning away and pointing at the frozen man he had pointed at in the beginning. I tire of this. I should have known that I would not be able to stand being in your company for too long. Already I want to try and kill you, despite having a far better idea in mind for today. Do you see that man over there? He waited until Ichigo nodded. That is no human but a demon. One of mine. And you're telling me this freely? Yes. Because you are not allowed to stop him. Ichigo raised an eyebrow at the dark mage, his grip tightening around his small blade at his side. Oh? Is that a threat? Not to you. I have no doubts you could kill him easily and I wouldn't even bother trying to stop you. In fact, I doubt I could, not with how slow I move in comparison. If you truly wish to do the deed, no one will stand in your way. Ziref kept his face straight, waiting until Ichigo took one step towards the demon before adding, but are you sure that is the wisest move? So there is a trap to it, Ichigo muttered. What's the catch? If you can't stop me, why should I not cut down your demon here and now? Because while the demon and its curse may not be a threat to you, what about everyone else here in the village? Ichigo froze, the shock in his expression making Ziref smile wider in sadistic glee. Yes, that's your incentive to stay put. My demon has had enough time to prepare his magic and to submerge it all around the village. With a snap of his fingers, this entire place will be reduced to ground zero. Why are you waiting then? Ichigo growled out. If he's already got his spell ready, why haven't you done anything yet? Why would you tell me in the first place? Ziref shook his head in disappointment. You can't tell yet? Why, it should be obvious. This is a game between us. If the two of us fight, there will still be winner today. You know it and I know it. But if I can't kill you physically right now, I can at least harm you mentally. Send your allies out. Send them out to fight this demon and save the city and its inhabitants. Or flee, running away as fast as you can with your friends and leave the villagers behind to die. No matter what you choose, the result will still be satisfying to me when I prove to you that you are no savior. Smirking once more, Ziref took a step forward towards him. Well? Let me hear your answer. What choice will you make? Will you abandon the strangers begging for your help or will you risk your friends to save them? Take your pick, but just know that the demon will detonate this city regardless in 6 hours. If you make a move on him, or if any villager attempts to leave the city, he will destroy everything. Ichigo still didn't respond, Ziref's anger growing. I said he was cut off when a storm of black energy slammed into him, knocking him back a few steps. As the energy cleared around him, he glared right back at Ichigo, the Shinigami's smaller blade finally drawn from its sheath and pointed directly at him. Well, what do you know, Ichigo stated, staring at the minor burns on Ziref that had yet to be healed as some of the black energy continuing to cling to him. Apparently the only way to make the damage stick is to make it linger. Thanks for helping me test that. And for that the game is now hide and seek. Snapping his fingers, Ziref unfroze the time around his demon, the creature looking around in confusion for a moment before spotting the two of them. The moment he did so, he shot off into the distance, but he didn't have anything to worry about from the two. They simply continued to stare each other down, like there was nothing else around them. Best of luck, Abomination. You too, you undead freak. Ignoring Ziref's furious look, he took a few steps around the dark mage, putting himself between Ziref and Kisuk for his mentor's protection. "Now get out of here." "With pleasure," Ziref shot back. "I hope you enjoy having your true self revealed to yourself." Taking a few steps back away from Ichigo, Ziref willed the darkness at his feet to begin to swallow him back up when Ichigo's voice cut across the distance between the two of them one last time. "One last question," Ichigo said, almost reluctantly. "You blocked the name and face of your brother when you severed those memories. That's probably the reason I managed to get so many of your memories, because you wasted time blocking that out before severing the connection. Your point is? Anyone would try and block out things in that moment if it meant keeping their secrets safe. I'm aware. But you blocked out your brother." Ichigo watched as Ziref's gaze remained unchanged. "And I've been wondering about this for a while, but what point would there be at blocking out the face and name of someone long dead? There should have been no need to do that. Except if he was somehow still alive." Ziref scoffed. "Interesting speculation, but it is speculation all the same. I can't believe you wasted my time with this." Turning away, he almost left then and there before. If he was still alive, there would be no need to hide such details normally either. Why would I know his name? Why would I know his face? That are millions of people out there, and he could be hiding among them without me ever knowing, even if he passed right by me. Knowing his face would do nothing for me. Unless... Ichigo's eyes narrowed as he watched Ziref turn back. "Unless I would recognize his face at first glance and would recognize his name the moment it's uttered." "Those are some wild accusations you are making. You honestly believe that my brother is still alive, even now after 400 years, and is close enough to you that you would be able to recognize him immediately? And here I thought you had something interesting to say." Without saying another word, Ziref left, swallowed up by the darkness he conjured in allowing time to move forward in the area once again. Ichigo briefly noticed how Kisuk was continuing speaking like before, the man in question pausing after a moment as his keen mind took note of the usual shift that had taken place around them, but he wasn't listening to him. "He lied, didn't he?" he uttered quietly to Mavis. "He left far too quickly to have just been annoyed at my words. It was like he wanted to leave before I could dig any deeper." "He did," agreed Mavis. "It seems we finally have a clue to his past. If we're lucky, Ziref might have missed a memory when he put the block up. Maybe one he either skipped over by accident or forgot existed. If you're not going to stop looking anyway, the least you can do is search through them for that image. You think if we find his brother we can stop him peacefully? You mean you want to know if threatening his brother's life might be enough to halt Ziref's plans?" Mavis shrugged. "After all he did to hide away his memories of his brother, there is a good chance. The question though is how his brother has managed to hide away for so long. You are right in that his brother must be someone you have met and would recognize, but have you ever seen anyone who didn't age? Because that's the only way his brother could still be alive after all this time." "Ichigo." Ichigo stopped speaking to Mavis for a moment as he turned towards Kisuk, the man holding the hilt of his cane tightly. "What happened in the last 5 minutes? Let's finish this later, Mavis," Ichigo muttered before walking closer to Kisuk so he could keep his voice down, unwilling to allow the villagers to hear his words and to panic. "Ziref's was here. We found the second trap." Kisuk nodded, almost as if he had expected such a thing to have occurred. "Tell me more." "Protector of the fairies." "Anything?" Taoshiro asked, coming to a stop in front of Karen as he finished his sweep of the west side of the village. Karen merely shook her head, her sweep of the area south to where he had been proving as fruitless as his own attempts. "No luck this time either, huh?" "We'll find it." "How hard can it be to find one stupid demon?" "Apparently very," Taoshiro muttered under his breath, his head looking from side to side. They had been at this for over 5 hours now, and they were running out of time in the imposed 6-hour time limit that Ziref had given them. Frankly speaking, they probably had a bit over 20 minutes at best, maybe even less. Their sweep of the area was almost complete, however. While they were covering one side, Kisuk had been covering the other. With them going anti-clockwise around the village and Kisuk going clockwise, they had almost covered every place left that the demon could hide in. They knew it was still here. Ichigo and Mavis had apparently managed to get a fix on his magical power before he made a run for it. While the situation was forcing him to remain in the village, Ichigo still could track for them. Accuracy was not his strong suit, but they at least knew that the demon was still close by. The area they had to cover was still far too large for one person to scour alone in this time though. He and Karen could barely cover their designated areas in the time they had available. Kisuke though, he honestly had no idea how the man was doing twice the work they were. But then Kisuke had been hiding for a good chunk of his life. He was probably an expert at knowing how those trying to hide thought. Even with him though, would they even find the demon in time? And what if it was too strong? They still had to kill it before it could destroy the village with whatever curse it had at its disposal. The stories the others had told him briefly about the curses of demons only reinforced the danger of such a threat, and if they couldn't stop it. His worries vanished for a moment as he felt a hand slip into his own, squeezing it tightly. Glancing at the source, he saw Karen looking away from him with a light blush, pretending to continue to search for the demon. "We'll find it," she stated confidently. He wasn't sure if her words were a true representation of her beliefs or if they were just meant to reassure him. But he was thankful either way. Squeezing back at the hand for a moment, he released it once again as he prepared to search the last area they had left. "Thanks," he muttered softly to her, Karen simply nodding her head in the corner of his eye. She opened her mouth herself, preparing to say something, when her eyes widened and the soft words she wanted to say were replaced by an urgent cry. "Over there!" Taoshiro's head snapped towards the source of her distress, seeing the demon now clearly in the distance. On it. It was still quite far away, but Shunpo would reduce that distance greatly in barely any time at all. All that was left was to send the signal to Kisuke. Raising his hand up as he ran, he fired off a small beam of lightning up into the sky. The kidya barely cost anything at all to utilize, which served its purpose as a signal well here. Knowing Kisuke would soon be on his way, the two of them rushed towards the demon they could see in the distance, both drawing swords and releasing their own shikai. Ice and fire burst to life around the two as they prepared to try and end the battle before it could even begin, knowing just how little time they had left. "I'll aim for the head," stated Taoshiro. "You aim for the body. Even if one of us misses, the other should hit." "Got it," replied Karen, keeping pace with him as they closed the final bit of distance between them and the demon. Taoshiro's long katana sliced through the air while Karen's massive blade slashed at the demon's body, both blades heading for their intended target. Drop dead. Spinning around to face them, the massive shift in temperature around him from the flames and ice warning him far before the shouting did, the demon sneered at them as it stretched out with both of its hands. Explode. The air between the demon and the two of them vanished in a massive blast, the explosion that formed expanding out right towards the two of them. There was no time to stop their swing, so instead they both poured magic directly into their blades, ice and fire being released as waves in front of them both. While their efforts had been rushed, the two of them together still had enough power in their attacks to halt the explosion in its tracks, keeping them both safe from harm from the surprise attack. "Shit," growled the demon as the hood of its coat was pushed back off its head by the blast. "You two are still alive, aren't you?" Shards of ice shot out of the smoke left behind by the explosion, almost stabbing into the demon's chest before it released another explosion right in front of itself in order to destroy the shards. The second the demon did it, then ducked on instinct, a slash made of flames tearing through the air where his head had been previously. Karen shot through the fading explosion a few moments later, her sword raised up ready to slice the demon in half. However, she found herself stopping, her eyes looking from side to side in an attempt to locate the demon. "Where is it?" she said as she turned to Taoshiro for answers, the man looking just as confused as she was. His eyes quickly did the same things she did before, glancing down, noticing the odd way the dirt had settled on the ground beneath them. It looked far too burnt to have been caught by the edges of an explosion. Which meant only one thing. Below. Raising his sword, he stabbed it down into the ground, letting his magic go wild for a moment as ice snaked its way through the ground. All around them ice stabbed up out of the ground, revealing where small tunnels must have been running beneath in order to act as escape routes for the demon to take. "You son of a bitch!" screamed the demon as it burst out of the ground nearby, using a large explosion to clear all obstacles in its way. "You almost skewered me like a pig," he growled angrily as ice shot out of where he had escaped from. "That was the idea," replied Taoshiro calmly, taking a good look at the demon before him. For the most part it appeared human. Male even. But it was also animal-like, a large furry tail poking out of the large coat it wore to conceal its appearance. Its hair had been combed over to one side and revealed a pair of slit-like eyes staring back at them, small fangs being revealed as the demon continued to growl at them. What worried him the most though was the demon's hands. With a strange black diamond-like pattern across them and with sharp claws, normally the demon might have been written off merely as unusual. But the faint remains of an explosion, still lingering around the demon's palms, told another story. Just looking at the hands told Toshiro one bit of very important information. He should not let the demon touch him. Karen dash. I know, said Karen as she cut him off, her gaze locked on the same thing his was. I'll be careful if you will. Fine. Taking a step forward, his sword raising as ice began to gather around it, he heard Karen's scream a bit too late. And then everything around him exploded from beneath his feet, stretching up and out as it tried to tear him apart through raw power. When it faded his body hurt, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Not by far. Rather than having his skin roasted to a piece, he instead had very light burns, his ice mitigating a lot of the heat of the blast while the magic in his body worked hard to strengthen himself and to shake off the brunt of the damage. You trapped the area, Toshiro said simply as he took a step back, returning to the area he could only hope had been safe from the start. Smart. Of course it is, snarled the demon. I'm not an idiot. Remember my name, you lowly humans. The demon that will make your life explode like a firework is called Jackal. It's 2-on-1, stated Karen. You won't beat us, even with your traps. Oh yeah? And why is that? Because of this. As one, both Karen and Toshiro jumped up lightly from the ground, their feet pressing down against the air just below their feet and forming a solid surface of magic beneath them. Jackal looked at them both for a moment before his head glanced down at the ground in what appeared to be depression. Always flyers, he muttered quietly to himself. It's always flyers. Why do I always have to fight people who can fly? It's not fair, for God's sake. The last few words came out with a snarl as he forced his gaze back up at them. If that's how you want to play it, he growled out, his body slowly expanding beneath his cloak before even that was ripped apart by the increase in mass taking place, then I'll be happy to oblige. The cloak tore apart to reveal a massive body covered in fur, the demon losing all its human characteristics as it morphed into a creation more like a beast. Its claws and teeth had lengthened and increased in size along with its now massive body, even its tail becoming more fearsome as its soft appearance became replaced by a dark spiky layer of fur. The demon roared once more as its back suddenly tore open, its flesh morphing in a horrific way as it began to knit what could only be described as wings from its flesh and bones. If it wasn't for the magic filling the gaps and making up for the missing parts, they doubted the demon would ever have managed to get off the ground with such a shaky pair of wings. Slowly but steadily, the wings began to flap and pull Jackal from the ground, the demon joining the two of them in the air. What, did you? Toshiro could barely get out words to describe the horrific state of the demon's back and wings. This didn't even look like it was a natural process either, and more like someone had forcefully torn open an old toy and shoved an extra part on the back. What? I finally had enough of all you lot, buzzing around over my head and out of my reach, stated Jackal angrily. So when Master Zeref finally came back ordering my assistance, I took the chance to beg him for this. Do you know how humiliating it feels, to beg your own creator to modify your own existence, since how it is cannot win any further? Because it's inferior to those it has to fight against. Because I do. And I hate it. But Master Zeref is understanding, Jackal continued on. Oh yes, he is understanding indeed. He listened to my wishes and even went as far as to ask me for my preferences. He asked me, a lowly servant whom he had thrown away for failing him, what I would prefer. These wings that he gifted me may be grotesque, but that is not because Master Zeref failed, but I asked him to make such a design. To ruin the form he had given me so I would never forget my shame. He's mad, Karen muttered, looking at the crazy look in the demon's eye. He's completely mad. That's because he's been modified far too much, came Kisuk's voice, the man appearing beside him with his Zanpakuto already released. Toshiro noted how he seemed more tired than usual, as if he had rushed right towards them at full speed the second he had seen the signal. Kisuk's focus didn't shift towards Toshiro however, taking in every bit of information he could see on the beast-like demon before them. The form is different. I assume it's the demon's Aetherius form. Regardless, the explosions gave away its identity. It's the same demon Mistogan fought and lost against at the Magic Council's headquarters. His eyes narrowed. Except it's been modified. Zeref can create demons from scratch, but once they are made they are fixed for the most part. The only way to improve is to start over and make a new copy. But he didn't hear. Exactly. A weak demon wouldn't be a problem, but a demon as developed as this would take time. More time than Zeref may have had to act in. So instead he modified the base that is the very core of the demon, even though he must have known it would break the demon's mind and reforge it into one big mess. Its power remains the same, but the mind is broken, lost to insanity. I would feel pity for the creature if it wasn't such a threat to us. With the three of us here we can take it down easily, stated Karen. She made a move to rush forward only for Kisuk to stick his arm out in front of her. Hey? What are you doing? Last time someone faced this demon, they learned its curse. It explodes anything its palms touch, even the air to a lesser extent. But that was before modification. Zeref must have known his demon can't stop all three of us. And if modifying the demon just a bit would break its mind, he might as well make more modifications alongside it. It's what I would do. Well, we can't just stand here, stated Toshiro, a hint of urgency leaking into his voice. We need to hurry. We're running out of time. We just need to keep him occupied for long enough. Hibiki contacted me only minutes ago and said they were about to return. We can evacuate the villagers into the Genesis. If we do that, the demon will destroy the village. Karen snapped back at him. They can't leave until the demon is dead. You are technically true, pointed out Kisuk. But this demon's mind has been broken. The command, destroy the village if the villagers leave or if Ichigo does, is likely being interpreted quite literally. So how does one describe the village? While leaving its borders, of course. But if the Genesis were to land inside the village itself, or at least get its loading platform within the boundaries, they haven't technically left, have they? You sure it will work? Toshiro asked, Kisuk shrugging in response. 80 no wait. 93% sure. The remaining 7% is based on the fact its mind might be so shattered that it even ignores its own commands and just destroys the village anyway before our time is up. So we're betting with the lives of the villagers, muttered Karen. I don't like it. If you have a better idea, speak. And if you don't like the idea, you only need to end this demon quickly so it is no longer a threat. I'll take that option then. Karen declared, raising her sword up as flames burst to life and wrapped around it. Bankai. Karen, wait. Toshiro begged, but it was too late, the girl being swallowed in a cocoon of her own flames as her Bankai activated. It quickly cleared to reveal her clad in her Bankai's power, but Toshiro could feel how much magic that had drained from her. Idiot. You haven't fully recovered yet. I don't care. If it's really a problem, then I'll just end this in the next few minutes. Bringing her Bankai's small blade back for a moment, she thrusted it forward, a vortex of flames exploding forth from its tip. Dare Psycha! Don't underestimate me! Screamed the demon before them, letting loose a loud screech from its throat. The screech itself caused the whole area around them to explode, every trap the demon had set being released at once. It not only destroyed Karen's attack in the process but also created a massive smoke screen for the demon to hide in near the ground. Rather than charging in after the demon, Kisuk moved his position to one higher up in the sky, his sword held almost lazily in his hand as he began to chant. Karen had other ideas, rushing downwards towards the smoke while bringing her blade back and swinging it forward again in an arc. Getchuga Tenshou. The slicing wave of flames tore down, parting the smoke that it passed through and scattering much more as it made contact with the ground below. Jackal took that moment to strike as Karen got too close, lunging out of the smoke with his hand stretched out towards her head. His fingers were almost touching when ice stabbed into his limb, forcing it away from Karen's head and missing it by inches. That didn't stop him from releasing a massive explosion in the air beside her though, the blast knocking her away even as she tried to retreat back. The explosion wasn't on the scale of the others. While big before, they were nothing compared to now. The explosion itself was just as large in its initial stage as the whole chain explosion Jackal had released before in the air, and it didn't even stop there, the energy released setting off more explosions just before it began to fade. Groaning in pain as she was flung back, Karen was thankful that her flames reduced the damage she took from such blasts before quickly rolling out of the way as another sweeping wave of explosions tore into the ground beside her, the shockwaves sending her tumbling back further than she intended. Digging her sword into the ground, she halted her momentum before her eyes snapped up towards the demon, seeing it lunging right at her. Heida number 88, Hiryu Agekazoku Shinten Reihao. A massive torrent of blue lightning and energy tore down in front of her, slamming into the demon and forcing it down into the ground. A massive explosion tore apart around the demon, but Karen was long gone by the time it happened, coming to a stop beside Toshiro, who had rushed down to check on her. "I'm fine," she stated, brushing away his concerns. "Underestimated how strong it would get. I have a grasp on it now." "Good," stated Kisuke as he joined them. "Because that attack of mine may have revealed a problem." "A problem?" Karen stared towards the fading energy, watching as the demon pushed itself out of the hole it had made when it released that massive explosion. Some of its flesh had been burnt by the attack, but for the most part it still seemed fine. The exception was the patch of raw flesh revealed where the fur had been on the demon's left arm, blood leaking out from the wound. Small explosions still kept occurring around the demon as it began to climb out of the hole, all happening around its left side. And all of them happened at the ground where the blood dropped onto. "There's the problem," Kisuke stated. "The explosions aren't the major problem, even though they are larger than before. If we're careful we can avoid them, especially if he has to make contact. The demon may be able to fly, but it isn't as fast as us, I know that from just watching. But even we can't completely avoid the splatter of blood when we slash at it. And from the look of it, those smaller explosions may be far more dangerous than the larger ones." Toshiro frowned before his eyes narrowed on the explosions happening from the blood. "He's right," he muttered, noticing how the ground was crumbling under the force so much easier than it had under any other explosion before now. "The power's been concentrated down. Be careful, Karen. You don't want to take a direct hit from too much of that." "Switch to ranged combat," Kisuke ordered. "You have elemental type Zanpakuta, so make use of that. It may not be as fast as a sword slash, but it will be far safer. Besides, I doubt you would be able to kill him now before we try and move the villagers," he stated, his eyes glancing up as green light burst into existence on the horizon. "The Genesis is here. Protector of the Fairies. Keep moving," ordered De Maria, marching forward with the two other Spriggan on her tail. The large force of troops they had brought with them were hanging not too far behind, carried on airships just out of sight in the clouds above. They had reasoned that it was far easier to hide as a group of 3 than it was to hide an attack legion consisting of a few thousand men. "We're wasting time here," De Maria stated angrily, pointing at the setting moon in the distance. It was almost hidden behind the mountains at this point. "It's almost daybreak." "Calm down, De Maria," Neinhardt replied, his arms held behind his head as he walked leisurely across the green fields of grass towards their destination. "We'll be there when we need to be. No point rushing. Just enjoy the sights around you for the time being. There isn't much of this to be seen at the battlefield, not with how much it has been ruined by Aziel's little stunt. If we don't pick up the pace we won't make it there in time." "And why do you think that? Have you seen it?" De Maria ignored him as she continued marching forward, leaving Neinhardt with little choice but to increase his pace so to not be left behind. "Have it your way then. I swear your beauty is wasted on you with that personality." "What was that?" "Nothing. I said nothing." "That's what I thought," growled back De Maria as she turned away from him, instead turning her attention towards their final member. "Hey Jacob. At least look like you're listening to us." "You are not my targets for the day," Jacob replied coldly, his gaze locked onto the horizon. "Therefore there is no need for me to pay you any heed. All that matters is the mark." "Great, he's in that mood of his," De Maria growled out angrily. "I can't tell which I prefer. The prude he is normally, complaining about how I'm too exposed with the way I dress, or how he is now, cold to the point it's hard to consider him as a human. He's more of a machine than wall when he's like this." "Just leave him," Neinhardt replied, coming to his ally's aid. His world is rooted in darkness we can only imagine. He's been Emperor Spriggan's favorite method of elimination for the past few years. Every traitor to our cause, every rogue scientist taking things too far, every ally too unstable and can't be controlled, he's seen it all. The way I see it, this mode of his is what's helped him stay sane during all this time. If he tried to do what he does with his usual self, he'd end up being too soft to his enemies or get distracted by things far too easily. Things like you or any other women dressed as he deems inappropriate. He's still a pain, DeMaria muttered. Turning her gaze back to the distance, she kept a watch out for any threats that might appear, even if she had divined that none would come that held a chance at even harming her. She would have no injuries by the time they reached their destination, that was a certainty that she had confirmed herself, and she had no reason to doubt that fact either. Did Emperor Spriggan assign you a specific target? Neinhardt asked, DeMaria shaking her head in annoyance. Said he didn't have enough information. The enemy is a careful one, unwilling to reveal much. We're going in blind and I honestly don't like it. Our enemy is Nukin and you know how strong God Serena is. Imagine fighting someone on his level. That is why Jacob is here, reminded Neinhardt. He will be our trump card in the fight to come. Besides, it's not like we will have to do all the work ourselves. This plan is only possible because of what you have seen. By the time the sun has risen and sets once again, the Ukin will be dead and our victory will be one step closer. Protector of the Fairies. Show me your despair. On board, careful does it, directed Hibiki, watching the villagers carefully as he glanced between them and his archive screens. Mistogan quickly moved to give them a hand with moving the little possessions they had salvaged ready to leave with, while Nozomi quickly was running around checking for any signs of trouble brewing from Ziref's end. Gray and Hades had chosen to remain in the ship with Uriah, out of sight for obvious reasons. That only left Mest, the man walking over to Ichigo while yawning. We heard a situation was unfolding here. Are the others enough to handle it? No idea, Ichigo replied absent-mindedly, his focus dedicated towards his senses and the hand he was pressing against the ground, faint patterns of blue light snaking out from beneath his palm. Don't have the ability to check, but I assume they're okay. Their magical power hasn't dropped to the point that I can't sense it at least. We'll have to trust in them then, said Mest, letting out another yawn. I think some of us are going to need some rest after this, myself included. We've been fighting ever since we arrived at the battlefield and Spriggan wasn't giving us an easy time. And when we have barely had a chance to rest after fighting all those hollows plus coming back here straight after we were done with Alvarez. I'm exhausted. Completely and utterly exhausted. Just bear with it for now, replied Ichigo, his focus still barely on him. It'll be over soon. I think. You think? Just me thinking the worst. Finally Ichigo tore his gaze from the ground, lifting his hand up and letting the magic he had been using slip away. Something's wrong. Wrong. Ichigo nodded. For the life of me I can't find the curse Ziref has the demon using. He claimed the demon would destroy the city, and since I can hear explosions faintly in the distance I know it has to be something like that. Perhaps the demon made the whole ground into one massive bomb? We have little way of knowing. Then what are you trying to do? Find the curse itself. Ichigo sighed, rubbing the back of his neck with one hand. Curses may be very different from normal magic, but they still rely on it at its core. I should be able to find some trace of it in the ground and should be able to absorb the energy powering it so that the threat will be neutralized. But I can't find anything. Not one trace of it. That's odd. Mest frowned, scratching his chin in thought. Could Ziref have been bluffing? Ichigo shrugged. Maybe? I don't know. He didn't seem like he was though. Maybe it's not one large signature and many smaller ones. I'll try and check the houses and buildings nearby, see if I can find some clue. Are you sure you haven't just missed something? I don't think so, but there's a lot I'm searching for. Mavis is doing her best to narrow down the field we're searching in. We know some odd energy signature is here, but we just can't find it, not when it's so weak that even the villagers have more magical power than it, and that's saying something. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. I'll have a look around too for anything. See if I can help. I may not be able to do as much as you, but dash. It's fine, Ichigo said as he cut him off. Just focus on getting the villagers to safety for the time being. The Genesis's shields should hold if the city does blow, so they all should be safe inside, but only if we get them in there. Do whatever you can to help speed up the process. As it stands, we are almost out of time and will be the moment the sun starts to rise. That's not long from now, Mest muttered. 10 minutes at most? Maybe a bit less. Exactly. Hurry as fast as you can. I'll keep searching and see if I can buy us even a bit more time. All right. Best of luck to you. Ichigo watched for a second as Mest rushed away before turning back to Mavis, the spirit shaking her head as she floated there beside him. Nothing, huh? Sorry, but I just can't narrow it down too much. I know the energy we're managing to just sense is somewhere within the center of the village, where we are now, but I just can't find it. It's like it's dormant, waiting for a signal, and that makes it even harder to pinpoint. Do your best and keep trying, replied Ichigo as he made his way back to the now empty village hall, its inhabitants having evacuated it in favor in reaching the safety of the Genesis faster. There had to be something here. Maybe downstairs. He couldn't believe he had forgotten, but he did remember people going in and out of the basement, one of which had been the demon itself. With little time left, he took the stairs 2 at a time, thankful that there wasn't far to travel compared to the basements he had encountered in the guild hall and underneath Aoyasu's house. For once it was a normal-sized one too, revealing to him a large, but still small in comparison, room, most of its contents already brought up to the surface. There wasn't much left at all if he was being honest, the exceptions left behind being food that had seen better days or broken tools and gear that were beyond repair. There was one odd part of the room though, something he only noticed because he was looking for something. In one corner of the room, near 2 of the barrels left behind, one of the tiles was sticking out at an angle, partially raised off the ground. He shot over towards it like it could vanish at any moment, ripping the tile off from the ground and revealing the small hole beneath. It was barely large enough to hold a few small items. He could even imagine someone using it as a hiding place for some money or a precious heirloom. But instead all he found was a blood-red crystal, energy spiraling around within as if it was trapped inside a prison. Mavis. Give me a second, Mavis replied, solidifying beside him so she could reach down and pluck the crystal from the ground. Holding it in both hands, unafraid of any potential danger, she spun it around a few times and gave it a few pokes. Anything. Hold on, I need to look quite deep here. But I am getting a faint reading. The demon's power is definitely connected to this in some way. Good enough, Ichigo replied, plucking the crystal from her grasp. He was about to absorb the energy powering it when he paused, turning back to her. Will this make it easier to track any others like it? It'll be easier if you absorb the power from it. I'll scan that and use it to locate any other sources. Finally, some good news, Ichigo responded, smiling as he activated the power of the absorb. Blue lines spread out from his palm towards the crystal that was held in it, reaching out across his skin and encroaching their way onto the crystal itself. The energy within seemed to flicker for a moment and then it dimmed, its energy being stolen and examined with each drop that vanished. Finally all that was left was the crystal itself, not a trace left of the energy that had been within it. Well? Ichigo asked as he let the crystal drop to the ground. He saw Mavis tilt her head slightly, even crouching down at the discarded crystal for a moment before looking up. What is it? I'm getting quite a few more readings. How many? About 91. Wait, 207. Wait, 104. What on earth? Mavis. The numbers are fluctuating so much, Mavis muttered. I've got a perfectly clear picture of where these signatures are now though, clearer than I ever had before. So many of them are over by the largest of the signatures, I assume that is the demon himself. So I think a good chunk of them are from him fighting. And the rest? Quite close together in fact, Mavis muttered. They're above on the surface. Some are slightly elevated actually from what I can tell. How did I miss this before? They're so clear now. All 89. Mavis. Ichigo asked in fear, his mind slowly reaching the same conclusion she had. Please don't tell me. The food Ichigo, she muttered softly. Not poison. Something much worse. Ichigo sprinted for the stairs, scaling them as fast as he could before almost knocking the hatch off its hinges as he leaped out. He was just in time to see a blinding light in the distance, almost like a sun had appeared so close to them as it lit up the sky from what little darkness still remained. Shielding his eyes for a moment with his hand as he struggled to see into the distance, he watched it fade away before glancing at Mavis. "I can't work out how many energy signatures are left," Mavis responded weakly. "They've all blended into one here, being so close to one another. One of them is in you from the magic you absorbed and it's almost gone now. And the others? Still there." But with nothing to trigger them, a scream cut her off, Ichigo's head snapping towards the Genesis just in time to see one of the villagers, just about to board, letting loose a scream as her body started to glow and bulge out unnaturally. Every other person around her was throwing themselves out of the way of her as her skin began to turn red, but they couldn't get that far in such a small amount of time. Then, to Ichigo's horror as he rushed towards her at his top speed, his hand stretching out to her with the familiar blue lines of the absorb ready to try and halt the blast, she exploded, nothing left of her but blood and gore. "Protector of the fairies. Why won't it stay still?" questioned Karen in annoyance, chasing after the demon as she left trails of fire in her wake. "Just hold still and die." Slashing forward with her sword, she released yet another wave of flames at her enemy, the flames coming close but still missing as the demon released yet another explosion behind itself with a quick flick of its wrist. Despite how large the demon was and how wrong its wings looked, it was fast. Fast enough to put pressure on them as they gave chase even if it couldn't escape them. The problem was that they were running out of time. They had to kill this demon before it killed everyone else, or at least tried to, and that meant chasing it down and beating it into the ground with magic. Kisuke had been firing a barrage of Kid down at the demon for a while now, almost as if he was testing its defenses. Some of the Kid he used worked and shot through the demon, others simply impacted against its fur and left very little in the way of damage. The demon had to have some kind of natural armor from that fur, or at least it had to when it came to blocking magic-based attacks. Taoshiro's ice right now was the best weapon against the demon simply because if it didn't stab into the demon then it would freeze its fur in place and make it susceptible to further damage from their attacks. The problem was that it wasn't happening fast enough. Jackal knew which of them posed the greatest threat to him, even with a broken mind, and he was taking measures to prevent himself from being targeted easily. This included using explosions in the air around him to create smoke screens, using an erratic flight plan to throw off Taoshiro's predictions and aim, and finally using her and Kisuke as shields. They were never truly close enough to be classified as such, but the demon knew that if she was somewhere in between him and Taoshiro then he would be hesitant to launch his more dangerous attacks at it in fear of catching her in the blast. "We can't keep this up for much longer," she stated to Kisuke as he drew near her, taking a break from his Kid spells for a moment. "We're running out of time and this isn't working at all." "I know. But luckily I have a plan. He's been so focused on Taoshiro that it makes it so much easier for me to move. But it would help more if you can draw his attention too." "How?" "Get close." She raised an eyebrow at him, not arguing against the idea but remembering his advice from before. "Yes, I know, his blood is dangerous. But you don't need to actually wound him. In fact, don't, that will make him feel prouder about himself and his abilities. Let him focus on you and Taoshiro and then I'll use the chance to slip in and stop him." "Your plan better work then," Karen muttered. "It's the only one we'll have time to try." Rushing forward, she put on as much speed as she could as she chased after Jackal. She had a rough idea which way Taoshiro was about to try and go to cut off the demon, so she instead moved to cut it off at the other side, knowing it would come right at her to avoid him. And as she predicted, it did, rushing towards her with a confused yet sinister look on its face. There was a reason she hadn't done this before. It meant putting herself directly in the way of Taoshiro's attacks, any that missed Jackal potentially hitting her instead, and it also meant being right up close to Jackal when it turned without time to prepare a big strike to keep it at bay. But now that wasn't what she had to focus on, which made this perfect for what she needed to do. As the demon's hand reached out towards her, snapping out like a spring towards her face, she brought her blade up and deflected it to one side using the flat surface of the blade. She couldn't afford to cut him. Not while she was this close. The action, however, alerted the demon to what she was trying to avoid, and the smirk that grew on his face was the first warning she had before he swung out with his other hand. This time she backed up, letting the palm swipe across the air in front of her and just miss her chest. The demon knew what she was trying to avoid. It knew she didn't want to expose herself to its blood, which meant it knew her counter-attacks would be weaker, not slashes but bashes from her blade. Those wouldn't cripple it. Those wouldn't make it easier to parry. Those wouldn't allow her to correctly counter-attack. They would only hinder her, making her an easier prey. In a time like this, the only option she could take was to retreat back, continuing to deflect his palms with her blade as carefully as she could afford to be. A few times she even thought she had cut him before it revealed that she had just struck out a bit too hard, almost breaking the skin but not quite doing so. It was tough dodging his left hand though. The ice that had been stabbed in there had long since broken, leaving only a small amount sticking out from the wound. But with each movement he made, the ice shifted a tiny bit and she knew it was slowly getting destroyed by the demon's own blood. Already a few drops had slipped through cracks between his flesh and the ice, exploding in the air right beside her and causing her ears to go deaf from the ringing. All it would take was for a few drops of that blood to hit her and she would be exposed for a moment, that time more than enough for Jackal to make sure she died or at least was left seriously injured. "Stop running!" The demon cackled, lunging at her with both hands this time. Reacting quickly, she shot forward, darting underneath both before slamming her free fist into the demon's body and sending it flying backwards. "Taoshiro!" Her cry was unnecessary, Taoshiro already acting on the opening she had made for him. With his sword raised up he swung it down at the demon, releasing a large dragon of ice that stretched out towards the demon. Despite being disoriented though, the demon had the perfect way to counter such a show of brute force. It released an explosion from its palms, the explosion lighting up the area around them as it slammed into any incoming attacks, including the dragon above. Under the force of the explosion the ice couldn't help but shatter, and as the smoke cleared, Jackal was nowhere to be seen. Scanning around, Taoshiro quickly began to search for the demon. It couldn't gone far without them noticing. So where was it? "Taoshiro! Look out!" His head snapped towards the source of the noise, hearing the panic in her voice. It also meant his eyes were drawn back to the collapsing remains of his ice dragon and at the demon lunging out from behind it. It had used his ice as cover and now it was finally close to him like it had wanted to be. "You're mine." Bakuda number 63, Sabaku. Jackal froze in the air, chains of yellow light grabbing it from behind and halting its momentum. The second it stopped, the chains from behind were released and they snapped forward, tangling Jackal up in them and binding his hands to his fur, his palms facing inwards. They could see the small signs of explosions happening against the fur, small in scale, but it was no use. They wouldn't help Jackal here. "Finally gave me a proper opening," Kisuke said as he walked up behind the demon in the air. "Because of Taoshiro here you never stayed still. And even when Karen engaged you close up you still were trying to avoid staying still where he could hit you freely. But finally you took the bait. Hada spells may not be as effective as I would like thanks to your fur, but Bakudu? Your fur only mitigates the damage, not absorb it. I realized that quickly when I attacked you. If it could absorb damage then a low-level kid such as Byakurai should never have hurt you. These chains won't hold me." Jackal's arms slowly started to pull away from his body, more explosions happening from his palms as he tried to force his way to freedom. He almost did it when. Bakuda number 61, Ryukujukura. Jackal's arms snapped back to its sides as the 6 beams of light slammed into it, forcing him to let out a roar in frustration. "You bastard! There's no need for that language," stated Kisuke as he brought his sword up. "Those are terrible last words." His sword hit nothing. His eyes widened at the sight as he knew there was no way he could have missed, not at that range. And with Jackal bound too there was no way the demon could have dodged either. Both had occurred and Jackal was nowhere close to him, instead right next to Karen instead, who had been flying up towards them. As his head turned towards Jackal, he saw the wide smile the demon made, its eyes full of madness. "I understand, Master Zeref. I understand." All of a sudden the demon's body began to swell up, glowing brightly before the flesh started to ripple and rupture under the strain of the energy within. "Karen!" Taoshiro screamed towards her. "Move!" She took one look at the demon that had suddenly appeared beside her before she shot upwards, flames exploding out from her feet as she pushed all her power into speed. Somehow they all knew this explosion would not be like any other. It would be far larger. Suicide attacks always were when they transformed the user's own life into power. Die humans. It was like a sun had exploded into life before their eyes, all three rushing out of the way and still not being fast enough to make it. With the other two close enough to him, Kisuk spun back around and held out a hand towards the explosion just before it could reach them. Bakuda number 81, thank you. A moment later and the explosion consumed the whole area, stretching up to the sky above and the ground below. They were lucky they were so far out, as if they had been closer the village might have been caught in the edges of the blast too. As the smoke began to clear though, the only life left were the three Shinigami huddled behind a transparent rectangle barrier, cracking in many areas but still holding strong. "Yuh," Kisuk muttered joyfully, taking note of the lack of the demon's presence and realizing there was nothing left of it. "We really lucked out this time. I barely made it with the Kidoo." Yeah, Karen muttered before letting her Bankai fade away, Toshiro grabbing her as she stumbled in the air for a moment. "Thanks. Both of you." "It's fine," Kisuk replied. Unlike Karen though, he didn't drop his guard, his sword still held at the ready. "Completely fine. Toshiro, would you mind escorting your little girlfriend back to the village? Now that the situation is over, Ichigo should be able to leave freely now." "What about you?" Toshiro asked, his eyes narrowing at how Kisuk continued to scan the battlefield. "The demon is dead." "Yes, but the way it moved from beside us to Karen. Did you notice how there was more light out than there was a second before that moment, even if just slightly? You don't notice stuff like that when it gradually happens, but you always do when there is a significant chance. Zeref is still here." Toshiro's eyes snapped towards the ground, looking for any signs of the man. "You sure? He pulled the same trick earlier to speak to Ichigo alone. Go get him. Zeref may not have decided to stick around after this, but let's be sure, shall we?" Guys? We may have a bigger problem." "What is it, Karen?" Toshiro asked as he turned towards her, seeing her gaze locked onto the village in the distance. "Karen." "An explosion," she muttered fearfully, her grip on her sword tightening as her eyes went wide with horror. "We haven't stopped the threat. I think we just activated it." "Protector of the Fairies." Ichigo watched the smoke without emotion as it faded, his body repairing the small amount of damage he had taken from being caught in the center of the blast. He caught note of some of the terrified screams of the villagers, some even being directed at him as they watched his flesh knitting together in the particularly badly burnt areas, but he couldn't focus on it much. All he could see was the blood painting the ground in front of him and the remains of the woman who had been standing there just a moment ago. "Mavis?" he asked weakly, the girl hanging from his shoulder with a blank look on her face. "You said they'll all?" "I don't know how many of them," muttered Mavis with no emotion. "The energy signatures have blended into one and I can't determine how many there are like this. It could be all of the villagers, but some of them may be safe and there could be traps left out like the crystal. It's no wonder we couldn't locate the energy until now. It's because it was hiding within the bodies of the villagers. It was so tiny in its inactive state that it blended perfectly with the little magic the villagers had in the first place." "How?" "The food," spoke Zeref from behind them, time around them stopping as the dark mage made his appearance. Ichigo didn't turn to face him, unsure of what expression he would be showing right now. Was it fury? Was it pain? Was it horror? He didn't want to give the man the satisfaction. "You laced it." "Well, Jackal technically did," Zeref corrected. "I merely created the plan and made the modifications necessary to make it work." By turning the food he touched into bombs, Jackal then helped make sure everyone but you and your allies ate some of it. Then we only had to wait for it to be digested and to infect the bodies of everyone who ate it. "That time limit," Ichigo muttered quietly. "That wasn't for my benefit. It was because you needed to buy time for this and keep us chasing shadows." "Guilty." He couldn't believe the sounds of glee he could hear from behind him. This was sick, and yet Zeref seemed to be imagining it all as some fun game. It was quite hard work to first develop this. You may even find the memory if you look close enough. I was what, 70? Something like that. Now all I had to do was use that knowledge from back then. And now that Jackal is dead, the true fun can begin. Only one of them detonated though, Ichigo stated. The demon died. So why? Why are the others still fine? He could almost feel Ziref's smirk drilling holes into his back. It was infuriating. Isn't it obvious? It's because there's no fun if they all die at once. Ichigo couldn't stop himself this time, spinning round to face Ziref only to find the man mere inches away. So that's the expression you're wearing, Ziref muttered, watching him curiously before returning to the glee he had before. Regardless, the expression you'll wear soon will be far more satisfying. And I so want to see it. More than anything. Gesturing out with one hand, Ziref pointed at the crowds of villagers with the Genesis. Shall I explain the true rules of the game? It's really quite simple. Some of these villagers are bombs. They will die in the most painful way they can imagine as their bodies are burst open from the inside, torn apart by the magic building within them. And they will all detonate on my command. So why is only one dead? A warning. Look at the damage she caused. Gesturing with his other hand, Ziref drew Ichigo's attention towards the destruction the explosion had done to the ground. Using a life as fuel for an explosive makes the damage vastly stronger than what it could do alone. Now imagine these going off in your ship. It would tear it apart and leave you with nothing but scraps. Why are you doing this? These people are innocent. Are they? Ziref shook his head. That mayor sold you and your family out for protection. You think the others are any different? You think humanity is any different? Humans are selfish creatures, full of hate and viciousness. I am no exception to that. No one is innocent, given enough time in this world. Not one single soul. But regardless of that, Ziref added, this is all because of you. Because I despise you. I hate your existence and what it represents, and so I will destroy everything that makes you who you are. If the Genesis is destroyed, it will remove your place of rest. It will hurt your efforts in the war. But you can save it. I modified Jackal's magic carefully and introduced some very interesting traits. Would you like to know what they are? You're going to tell me anyway. Ziref nodded. Of course. Upon his death, the magic he has left does not fade. Instead, it lingers for another hour longer. For the most part it will then vanish, but I can trigger it through exposure to even the slightest trickle of my own version of his magic. It's pretty pathetic in comparison. I only learned enough to build from it, and even then what I know isn't usable in battle, but it is good enough for my purposes. Now I know what you plan to do, Ziref continued, pointing at Ichigo. I've been watching from the shadows. You will want to absorb the energy threatening to kill them. However, I was already aware of such a possibility after knowing you were able to steal my memories. Thus any attempts to trigger that power of yours will cause a villager to detonate instantly. Now that was some tricky work to accomplish. I had to make the process accelerate when exposed to a foreign source of energy while not allowing their own energy to impact the curse, and it does also mean that even your presence around them now that they are ready will begin to accelerate their deaths. If you get the chance to stand in front of one of them, they are likely going to explode in the next second. Why are you telling me this? Why? Ziref laughed. Because it's fun. Because I want you to know the situation you are in. Because you can stop the explosion from happening. If enough explosions happen, your airship will be unrecoverable. And if one happens in the first place, how many villagers here will die? How many will perish in the blast? But you should also know that the magic pouring the explosions is tiny. It's the life that increases the scale of it. Ziref's smirk grew as he watched Ichigo's eyes widen in realization. Now you get it. You're telling me to kill them. Just the villagers about to detonate. However, it is your choice. Save your ship and whichever villagers aren't bombs. Or lose both in one go. It's your choice. Let the game begin. Ichigo spun away from Ziref as time restarted around them, his eyes locking onto the villagers nearby. They all looked fine still, but he knew it wasn't true. But what did he do? What choice was he meant to make? There had to be a way to save them. If he just didn't approach, he might be able to buy enough time for Kisuk to get back to help. You want to wait for help, right? He heard from Ziref behind him, the sound of snapping happening. I won't let you do that. Screams resurfaced and Ichigo's eyes saw it clearly. one of the men near the edge of the airship swelling up while screaming in pain. Others were running from him, but there were some who had frozen, far too close to live if such a blast went off. One of the children beside the man screamed in fear, both for him and his father, only to find his sight blocked and for blood to splatter across the ground around them. The sound of a body hitting the floor was heard by everyone as they turned towards it, both in shock and fear, only to find the swelled-up body of the man lying there unmoving, blood pouring out from his neck. Their eyes quickly left the motionless corpse though to focus on the man standing above it, a large blade held out to one side with blood still dripping down it. A man with orange hair. They all stared at Ichigo for a moment in horror, many of them backing away. And then another man suddenly screamed, his arm beginning to swell up unnaturally. Ichigo was immediately right before him, his smaller blade slicing up and severing the arm in a faint hope that it would be the only part of the man that would be a bomb. But it was not to be, the man's leg instead beginning to swell before the rest of his body did, as if Zeref was purposefully messing with the speed of which the explosion built up it. This time there was little choice, Ichigo's blade slicing through the air and killing the man in one blow. The other villagers around the man fell to the ground in horror, blood landing on them as they screamed and tried to crawl away from the corpse. But it wasn't the corpse they were afraid of. Rather than man that had already killed two of them. Ichigo made to say something before his voice failed him at the sight of one of the women rushing at him with a makeshift weapon, grabbed from the floor. He made to avoid her strike, a job so easy that it could have made him laugh any other time, only to see the beginnings of swelling as her body started to expand. And with so many people still so close, there was no choice. Now that's more like it, muttered Zeref, watching as Ichigo cut down another of the villagers only to then find another preparing to explode. Do your best. Try and save them. Try and save all of them. I want to see the face you'll make when you realize it's all for nothing. Protector of the fairies. What is this? Muttered Karen as she landed on the ground, seeing the burnt crater before the Genesis. She quickly noticed the others standing by the doorway, showing a variety of different expressions. Mistoggen seemed to be in pain, clutching his head with one hand while looking into the ship. Nozomi meanwhile appeared to be watching in shock, her hands tightly gripping her arms. Hibiki had taken to looking away, his eyes clenched shut as if he could not bear to look inside. And Mest. He was looking there unfazed, as if what he was seeing wasn't anything he hadn't seen before. She found herself almost dreading walking up the platform into the Genesis, and the first thing that greeted her was the sight of red blood covered the ground as far as she could see, pools of it leaking out of the bodies of those scattered around the room. She found her gaze being drawn down to the one at her feet, a hand stretched out as if trying to run away alongside a few others. The blood was soaking her feet, she began to notice, causing her eyes to widen in horror as she stumbled back. She recognized the woman. She was one of the villagers she had talked to in her brief time here. Who did this? And why weren't the others doing anything? They were just staring at it and staying back. And where was Ichigo? Wasn't he protecting the villagers? Her eyes forced themselves to refocus on the sight before her, staring into the ship itself and looking for what had captivated the attention of the others. And when she saw it, her blood froze. She didn't even respond when Taoshiro walked up beside her, nor did she when Kisuke walked past her into the room, merely trying to avoid the bodies and not caring about the blood. She could only watch as she saw her brother standing there in the center of the room, someone in front of him that she couldn't see. His cloak had been dyed almost completely red and his hair had streaks of red now covering it too. One of his blades were the worst though. The large weapon was soaked in it. She saw him bring back his other sword for a moment, finally seeing the last man still alive there. The mayor of the town. At this distance she couldn't tell what he said, but she could see him speak a few words to her brother. And then her sight was blocked again as Ichigo stabbed the blade forward, straight into the old man's chest. No. She didn't even realize it had been her that had screamed for a moment, nor that she had moved. She didn't even realize she had released her Zanpakuto again, a mole being swung right for Ichigo's exposed back. She heard the cries to stop, but she wasn't listening, too lost in fury and pain to care. Somehow she already knew it was pointless. Ichigo was far stronger and faster than she was. And yet he never spun round to face her or even try and stop her. Instead her blade tore through his back, his own blood joining the blood of the villagers before she realized she had actually connected. That in itself was enough to make her freeze, and she found herself unable to move as the wound healed itself and Ichigo began to turn towards her. She wasn't quite sure what she was looking at for the moment. There was no fury on his face from her attacking him nor annoyance at such an action. There was pain though, but definitely not from her strike. There was also despair, his eyes looking at her as if begging for help. And there was also nothing, as if what he was looking at didn't matter in the least to him. Finally it all vanished as he shut all of it away. He didn't say a word to her, instead turning to Hibiki and saying one thing. "Prepare to leave. We're done here." With that said he turned his back to them and took back his smaller blade from the mayor's corpse. And then he was gone, walking away further into the ship and leaving a trail of blood in his wake. Protector of the Fairies. Laughing at the sight before him, Ziraf gripped his sides as he tried to hold his voice in. He failed miserably, almost falling from his throne as he watched the memory again and again on the small archive screen before him. No guards would disturb him right now, none of his Spriggan had any meetings with him that he needed to attend, it was just him and him alone. And that meant for a brief while he didn't have to play the role of Emperor Spriggan who had little interest in Ichigo Kurosaka's death and could instead be Ziraf again. His smile widened as he reached the middle of the memory. It had been fun for a while just using the older members of the village, but eventually he hadn't been able to restrain himself. This was the point where he began setting off the children instead. It was hilarious to him, watching as the abomination cut down man, woman, and child all in the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, one of them wouldn't be a bomb. He had loved that part more than anything else. Watching how that faint glimmer of hope, that tiny desire for light, vanish from the abomination's eyes as he came face to face with the reality of the situation. There was no saving any of them. But it had been that final kill that had led to the most amusing part of it all. He wished he had been able to see what the old man had said. He had left the old mayor alive for a reason. He had wanted to hear the words the old man would utter and how he would curse the abomination for what he had done and what he had brought upon them. But instead he had stayed too far back and hadn't been able to approach silently when those other allies of the abomination had appeared. He had wasted too much time beforehand having fun and so missed out on what could have been glorious. But, as a result, he got to watch the abomination's own sister rush at him, full of blind rage, and try to kill him. He had been just as shocked as the others to find the abomination hadn't even moved out of the way. A faint part of him had hoped that the abomination would have cut down his own sister, but he knew this wasn't enough to break him to that point just because she attacked him. But that face. He tried to keep his voice contained, but it was pointless. It broke out, despite his best attempts, into full-blown laughter. In the process he found himself slipping from his throne and coming to rest against the stairs of it as he tried to cover his mouth with one hand. That had been the expression he had wanted to see. No, it had actually been better. The pain, the despair, and the resignation in the end. The acceptance that there was no other way left for him to take. When had he laughed this hard and enjoyed such a sight? Not in a long time, if he was being honest. Not in a very long time. "You look like you're having fun, Your Majesty," spoke a male voice from the corner of the room, Ziraf's laughter ceasing instantly. "Oh, don't stop on my account," the voice continued, his words almost like a snake's. "Laugh your heart away if you wish. I won't stop you. I won't even tell anyone either." The screen vanished from sight as Ziraf got to his feet, turning his attention towards the man at the edge of the room. "What are you doing here?" he growled out. "Jin." The man with short silver hair, brushed down so that it almost covered his eyes, gave what must have been his attempt at an innocent smile. Unfortunately it came out vastly differently, appearing to be mocking more than anything else. "Why, I thought I would report back on the progress of the army," Jin stated. He made to continue before pausing, his attempts at a smile turning into more of a true smirk. "Should I wait for Ziraf to leave and for Spriggan to return?" "Get on with it," Ziraf ordered, uncaring that the man knew his identity. The fact that he did would normally have been cause for alarm with anyone else, but he had far less to fear from Jin, as much as the man liked to push his boundaries. They had an agreement, he supposed it could be called, one that he knew Jin would not break until he got his end of the bargain. "I don't have time for your games." Jin shrugged. "Very well. As you have taken to spending a lot of time in Alvarez recently, August felt it was necessary to have at least one Spriggan in the city with you at any one time, just in case. We are of course rotating in and out, trying to keep the enemy guessing if they do realize what we are up to, and today it was my lucky day. Tell him to stop such a pointless endeavor. None of our enemies have ever seen Alvarez, let alone reached it before. I have little to fear if our enemies cannot even get past my army. I'll pass it along, Jin replied, his smile not dropping. It was obvious the man really didn't care for the matter much and was just playing the role of a good soldier. I have to say though, it's fascinating to see what has captivated you so much. Captivated? I think you need to choose better words. Oh, but I don't think so, Jin shot back, walking closer to the emperor. Locking yourself in the throne room for hours at a time, working on projects you won't show anyone, and now you finally leave only to play a game with little Ichigo there? But I suppose captivated is not right. You're obsessed. Ziref scoffed. And I thought you were clever. I am not obsessed in the slightest. I merely require one thing from him. For him to suffer as he dies. That is all. I suppose you're right, Jin admitted, his words setting Ziref on edge. Jin had conceded far too easily for his liking. Though. There was. I have to say, that says more about you than anything else. Oh. Ziref tried not to show the annoyance he felt as Jin came a stop right before him, just 2 steps down from his position. And what is that? Jin just continued to smirk, glancing at Ziref through half-opened eyes. You hate him, no one can deny that. But I've heard a few stories of my own. About the boy who was meant to have died but lived. The work of Kisukira Hara. He is such a pesky dash. Oh come now your majesty, Jin interrupted mockingly. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about you of course. The smirk seemed to grow for a second at the sight of Ziref's anger growing. Yes, I heard a few stories. Had to look very hard but records still exist from 400 years ago. Stories about a child who would never die no matter what was thrown against him. Ignoring the growing anger, Jin continued to speak, pressing his luck further. Oh, and such a hard life he must have had. How horrible he must have been treated, just for avoiding death. While circumstances are not quite the same, isn't the reason you hate little Ichigo here because he didn't get that experience? For someone who surviving a similar ordeal early on, it must kill you to know that he experienced happiness instead of hatred. Why you might even envy Dash. Jin stopped speaking just as a hand shot towards him, flipping backwards through the air and narrowly avoiding whatever spell had been launched at him. Now that wasn't very kind of you, your majesty. That could have killed me, and then where would you be without your favorite? Get out of my sight. Before I take away any chance you'll have at your revenge. Jin's smile vanished entirely, the man nodding briefly as he retreated away, knowing better than to push his luck any further. Even with the man gone though, Ziref's anger did not fade. Envious? Him? He hated such an idea. He hated the fact someone even considered such an idea about him. First the abomination, now that snake, they all dared to state such things and consider themselves to be able to understand even a bit about him. There was no way he envied that abomination. So what if his life had been happy? That in itself was merely an anomaly since the people hadn't realized the monster he truly was. But he would show them. He wouldn't feel satisfied killing that abomination until he experienced that same gripping isolation and rejection he should have faced from the start. Protector of the fairies. The monsters in human skin. Please no. Shut up, Ichigo muttered, clutching his head. No, don't. I beg you. Shut up. You monster. You killed them. Shut up. Ichigo tightened his grip on his head, his nails digging into the skin and drawing blood as he tried to drown out the voices with his words. But no matter what he did, they just wouldn't stop. Every time he closed his eyes he saw their faces. He saw them begging, screaming at him with either desperation and fear or hatred and pain. He saw their faces contorting in pain right before he cut each and every one of them down, every man, woman and child until there was only one left. Shut up, he continued to mutter, their voices unrelenting. Shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. His eyes snapped open to try and distance himself from the memory, but it was no good. He was still covered in blood. Their blood. No matter where he looked he could see it, covering his cloak, hair, blades, and the floor where he had walked in across uncaringly. He felt his hands shake as he pulled them from the side of his head, looking at them and the blood that coated them as he felt his heart trying to beat its way out of its chest. Whose blood was this? When had he gotten it? None of that could be answered because it had all been lost in the midst of the chaos in his desperate hope that one of them, any of them, could be still saved. But it was that man's words that haunted him the most. The mayor's words still rung in his ears, words he didn't want to hear and shouldn't have been told. Why did he have to say those words? Why couldn't he have said any others but those words? The sound of a knock on his door made him jump, his attention so lost that he hadn't even registered anything else but those voices until now. Glancing up he just stared at the door for a moment before turning away, hoping, no begging, that they would get the message and just leave. He didn't want to see anyone right now. He didn't want to hear anyone right now. Even his brother and his Zanpakuta spirits had taken to staying quiet. Mavis was the same though every once in a while he would feel her presence behind him, a hand rubbing against his back whenever he heard the screams far too loudly to endure alone. Ichigo? It's me. He could hear Nozomi's voice but it wasn't coming from the door. She must have teleported in again, not that he had noticed. He didn't turn to face her either, his eyes clenching shut as the sight of the blood became too much for him again. When had been the last time he had experienced this? If he was being honest it was probably back on the first mission Juoshiro had sent him on. The time where he had slaughtered all of Baragan's Dark Guild, the man's friends and allies, all under the influence of his hollow side. But that still meant that the one who had killed those mages had been a part of him. A darker side maybe but still very much him. And this time there had been no one controlling his actions like that. It had been all him, wielding that coldness to do anything necessary until there was nothing left. He had hoped Nozomi would have simply left him there. He didn't want someone with him right now, trying to help. He didn't want this pain to lessen because it was exactly what he needed to feel, to know it was his actions and existence that had caused the death of all those innocent people. But instead he felt a pair of arms wrap around him from behind, no words being said but the meaning behind it as clear as day. He wasn't quite sure how long they stayed like that for. All he knew that it helped keep the voices down, their words muffled at times until he could finally open his eyes again. I killed them, he whispered softly. Every single one of them. I know, Nozomi replied. Kisuke said he examined the residual energy left behind after Mistogen told him and the others who had been missing when the explosions happened. He said there was nothing you could have done there. I know, Ichigo replied. I knew any one of them that was infected was a lost cause. I knew that if I didn't kill them that another might die. So I didn't hesitate. I just went right in and killed them, one after the other, again and again and again. Ichigo let out a laugh, not one of joy but of sick pain. And you know the worst part? I thought I could save them. I had the arrogance to believe that if I killed enough of them the threat would end. That it would meet whatever quota Zeref had set for this sick game of his. But it never stopped. Zeref never had any intention to let any of them live. All I could do was cut them down every time they began to swell before they could explode, continuing till no one was left but me again. It's not your fault. Of course it is, Ichigo muttered back. This was all because of me. Those villagers died because Zeref wanted to show me just how much of a monster I can be. You aren't one. Ichigo let out another laugh, more broken than before. But that's the thing. He was right. I've done this before. It wasn't me in full control at the time but the actions were the same. I cut down every villager here and ignored even their cries for help as I did so. I crushed any emotion I felt and just did what was necessary. Turning his towards her slightly he asked, Tell me, am I even human if I can do that? Yes, Nozomi replied, unflinching at the pain-filled expression on his face. Because you feel pain for what you had to do. You feel guilt and regret it. You did what was necessary, not what you wanted. Which is why I know you are still human. Because a monster would feel none of that. Ichigo turned away from her again, his fists gripping his cloak tightly in pain. I hear them, you know. All of them. Every single one of them. Every cry for help I ignored, every word of hatred I was given for my actions, they keep running around in my head and won't ever stop. And the mayor's words. They were the worst. What did he say? Nozomi asked him softly. Whatever pain he must have felt, I'm sure it was only said in the heat of the moment. That's not it, Ichigo muttered. It's all right. I forgive you. Those were his words. He heard no response from Nozomi, making him laugh again slightly. I know. That's why they're the worst. I could have taken anything else from him. Eternal hatred, a promise to never let me rest for what I've done, anything like that I was prepared for. But that man. He should have been in more pain than anyone else. The villagers were precious to him, he continued to say. More than they were to me. More than they were to anyone else. He would do anything for them. He has done anything for them. And I killed them all. He should have hated me, for taking away everything from him. But instead he said those words to me, words I shouldn't have heard from him. But they were words you needed, Nozomi stated quietly, Ichigo stiffening beneath her grasp. I think he told you that because he realized the danger. He must have realized none of them could be saved. And yet he watched you try. It was a cruel and painful method, but it was the only way that some might live. And you took it, preparing to shoulder that burden. That's why he said those words to you. Because he was thankful that you had tried so hard for their sake. Ichigo still said nothing, so she took that as a sign to continue. We saw his body afterwards. He was smiling. That was not the face of a man who wanted to curse you. That was not the face of a man that wanted you to suffer. That was the face of a man that had watched you suffer and wanted to help you with his last moments. If there is anyone responsible for all of this, it's Ziref. He was only the trigger for it. And yet that is enough, interrupted Nozomi firmly. What did Ziref want from you here? To us, it seems more like he wanted to break you. Like he wanted to destroy your own morals and leave you a wreck of your former self. And I think, if the mayor hadn't said those words to you, he may have come close to succeeding. Messed himself that today you looked so much like your future self to him, a man broken by the responsibilities of the war. But right now you aren't. You're still you. If I hadn't come here. If I had us leave earlier rather than considering the idea of another trap. We don't know how long Ziref planned this for. And if we hadn't come here, Taoshiro would have died. If that happened, I think you would be even worse off than now. Releasing him for a moment, Nozomi moved round until she was right in front of him, bringing her hands to his face to make sure he couldn't look away from her. We do not blame you for what you had to do. Karen does. Karen didn't understand at the time. She does now. She may not like what you did, but she cannot hate you any further knowing what truly happened. And we don't hate you for it. But we need you out here. I know it's painful, but without you we won't stand a chance. Show Ziref this isn't enough to turn you into a monster. Show him you are still you even after all of that. Please. Ichigo kept trying to avoid her eyes until finally he found them glancing over her, freezing in place. He didn't see the hate he had feared he would, nor the fear or wariness of suspicion. Only concern, towards him who should not be the one receiving it. They won't come back, he muttered, looking directly into her eyes and watching for any signs of waving thoughts about him. They're all dead and they died because of me. Because I'm the one Ziref wants and he can't yet kill me, so he settled for others that would hurt me. They won't ever come back. Their blood is on my hands. And it won't end at this, you know that. Ziref will continue to do this until he succeeds. Until I finally admit to him that we are the same. Perhaps, Nozomi replied softly. But that day hasn't come yet, and that blood that was spilled today is also on his hands. If you can't forgive yourself for what you were forced to do, don't. But remember that they suffered at the hands of another too. Everything they were forced to endure, it was also because of him. So if you can't forgive yourself, you must at least not forget that. If you are to blame, you must remember that he also shares that blame, even more so than you. A soft smile slowly appeared on her face as she made to stand, pulling him up with her. So please, come back to us. We still need you. Ichigo's hand slowly loosened from his cloak before he reached out and grabbed her, pulling her tightly towards him as he gripped onto her as if she was a lifeline. "It hurts," he muttered weakly. How much did my future self endure this for before he broke? How much pain did he endure after that? "I can't answer that," Nozomi whispered back. "But he isn't you yet. You have a chance to not be. And if you don't want to be, don't be. You can be better if you wish. You can be however you want to me." Wasn't that part of the reason Mest came back? To ensure there was a version of you fighting that still believed. Ichigo stayed quiet for a moment, Nozomi not saying anything as he continued to think. Then, finally, "Tell the others to prepare to fight soon. We're going after Yuzu and the others. We're launching the attack now. I can't handle any more death as a result of my actions," Ichigo muttered. "I won't take the risk a second longer anymore. It's time to attack." Protector of the fairies. "Just look at her," the guard outside the cell door said to his friend, the other guard merely frowning at the sight. "Pathetic, isn't she? Can't believe this monster killed so many people. The zombie girl they called her. Look at her now." "We should leave, Charles," his friend said, trying to pull him away. "We shouldn't be here. In a few minutes, Zan. I want to speak with her for a bit first." Pulling out the keys he had bribed his way to get from one of the other guards, he opened the door to the cell, stepping in and examining the motionless girl chained to the wall. At first glance she might have appeared to be dead, but every so often they could see the faint beat of her chest. Her appearance finally came closer to matching that of a zombie's though. He had first seen her when she was brought in and she was much thinner than she was now, the outlines of her bones sticking out against the skin. It seemed even she had to eat, and the little food they had to force feed her to eat was doing little to help. "You know you killed a lot of us," he said as he knelt down beside her, his spear pressing against the ground for him to support himself with. "One of those was a friend of mine. Well, more than a friend really. Was even going to ask her to marry me one day, if things got that far. She was one of the kindest people I knew, and then I heard she died. And worse, I heard she had been made into a zombie and was now killing our own men. If she could have seen herself then, I think she would have killed herself in shame of her actions." The zombie girl before him still didn't respond, causing him to raise his hand and clench it into a fist. "Say something, damn it!" he shouted, slamming his fist square against her face. He was treated to a satisfying crack from her nose before he pulled his hand back, ignoring his friend's warnings behind him. "Enough, Zan. I know what I'm doing. Be quieter. Someone will notice. Even if they do, who cares?" Charles replied. "She's trash. The enemy. Who cares if we get a little rough here as well? She's a zombie. She can take it. That's not the point. I'm leaving. And you should too." He heard the sound of his friend retreating away, but he didn't follow. He had waited too long for this moment. "I guess it's just me and you now," he muttered before getting to his feet. "Now then, how should I pay you back?" A dark smirk spread across his face before he brought his spear back. "Oh, I know," he said before stabbing the spear forward. The girl made no noise as the spear stabbed into her leg. All that happened was that her eyes opened blankly and stared at him. That expression merely pissed him off further. It was like she was looking down on him, as if saying he was so inferior to her that he couldn't even hurt her. "Stop looking at me like that." He brought his spear up, ripping it free from her leg, before bringing it down again, right into her stomach. Still nothing. He repeated the action, stabbing the spear into her again and again and again. He didn't see her eyes go vacant until after the 15th strike, panting for breath as he took a few steps back. Any movements she had made before had stopped, not even the signs of breathing being present anymore. It was like she had died. But that wasn't possible, right? She was a zombie. This shouldn't have killed her. "Charles," he heard his friend call out, returning quickly from the sound of it. "We need to go. Someone's." His friend trailed off at the sight he was greeted to, looking towards him in shock. "Charles. What have you done?" "Killed her." "I killed her." "But how? She's meant to be undead." The War Council was afraid to employ the methods necessary to destroy her in case it caused additional problems. It's why she was sealed here. You shouldn't have been able to kill her. So how? I don't know. I just don't know. Protector of the Fairies. Your Majesty. Good morning. It's morning already, is it? Waiwak asked, opening his eyes before slowly pushing himself out of his throne. Another day. And I don't feel the slightest bit weaker. He let out a small chuckle as he began to walk down the stairs, Jugram waiting before him like he always did when he slept, keeping watch. I think I finally am starting to enjoy these mornings, even after experiencing this same phenomena for countless years since my awakening. I haven't feared what I might see when I wake up in a long time. As it should be, Your Majesty, Jugram said respectfully. There is nothing you should need to fear from the world, least of all the break of day. That is true, but there was once a time where I feared what I might see. Or rather what I might not see. Splitting my power up was a wise move so that I could enjoy such a sight for once. It is a shame that old fool cannot see it with me. That old fool, Your Majesty? Who are you talking about? Just someone I knew long ago, came the king's reply, turning back to his throne and frowning at the sight near the bottom of the stairs. She's become more attached to me than I expected, he stated, eyeing the pink-haired girl lying there. Sky magic users have always been a bit reluctant to trust another Ukin over the one they first meet, but her obsession is far greater than I anticipated. It was useful to pull her over to my side, such healing powers are a great rarity to possess, but I didn't realize quite how far her madness was rooted. Godslayers are difficult beings to work with, Jugram stated, even though he knew it was likely that Waiwak already knew such information. The potential power of a god is too much for a human mind to cope with when not prepared, especially when the mind is so young. I would suspect her constant use of God Oversoul has pushed her far beyond the normal realm of sanity. She must have gained that tremendous power and used it before she was ready for it. Such difficult beings they are, Waiwak muttered, walking past the girl while letting her sleep at the stairs. Jugram watched the action with a careful eye. He himself would have gotten rid of the girl long ago for daring to act so casually with his king countless times over. He wouldn't have been able to trust her in the slightest. But then he knew what his king was like. She wasn't allowed to do what she wanted because he considered her special or unique. To him, she was like a stray cat he had picked up and had taken a liking to. Nothing more. Has Yuzu recovered from her successes last night? Waiwak asked, not turning round as he continued to walk up to his seat. Her progress has been especially pleasing during these last few days. Jugram nodded as his king turned to face him as he sat, resting his back against his large throne. The soldats protecting her informed me that she awoke only an hour ago and is currently having breakfast with some of the other Sternritter. He paused for a second before adding, they even say she seems quite relaxed in their presence now in contrast to the beginning of her stay. This is only the view of a few soldats, so it may not hold as much weight to it, but I understand, Waiwak replied simply. You believe she is simply pretending to fool her captives and make them relax their guard around her. She is still a viable threat. The only reason she has yet to move against us is because her training had yet to be complete and because she knew she couldn't beat you. The former is now almost not an issue, and if she accessed the right soul there is no telling what she might be capable of in her efforts to escape. Your worries are understandable, but they are not necessary. Even if she finds a powerful soul to use, she cannot overcome me with that power. And if she wanted to run, first she would have to free the prisoners. They may be pretty much strangers to her, but she is far too kind to escape alone while they are left here to rot. However, Waiwak added, there is another possibility. One you seem to find being far more improbable. Isn't it possible that she, of her own free will, has begun to find herself comfortable here? It is not like we have shown her anything but kindness. As a Quincy, she is one of my children, and I show favor to my children. Failure may lower one's worth, but success will grant you all the luxury you desire. And even a kind soul like hers will begin to waver if shown nothing but kindness, even if she knows that she is meant to see me as an enemy. So the reason she is eating with the other Sternritter freely. It is because she has grown to like some of them, or at least tolerate. She has spent a month here in our company, and that time is more than enough to begin to build some kind of bond with people, even if she didn't intend to do so. And for someone as kind as her, she cannot fake such feelings without them inevitably becoming true over time. As much as she hates to admit it, she is beginning to find herself at home here. She has yet to finish seeing it as such though, Jugram reluctantly pointed out. I'm sorry sir, but I cannot see her as anything but a threat. Understandable. You are my own personal guard, the one who rules in my absence. But you also lack my power. You feel more afraid of events like this because you do not hold the necessary power to endure through whatever result occurs. But you do not need to worry. I am not worried, and that should be reason enough for you not to worry either. And I guarantee, very shortly Yuza will fight her own friends without us having to do anything. There will be no way that she won't after she meets her mother's soul. Her mother's soul? Why would that change? The gears clicked into place in Jugram's mind, the man quickly closing his mouth upon the realization so that he didn't appear to be staring in shock. So that is what you are after. You truly do have no need to worry about such things. Now you understand. What about the final push on the demons? Are the Sternritter assigned to the area making good headway? They are moving as intended. We lost 2 recently when Mardgeir Tartaros appeared, however. Not even Volstandig was enough for the 2 to win. I saw the fight while I slept. Such a shame. I had high hopes for those 2, but I guess this is what I get for overestimating their abilities. Or perhaps this is the strength possessed by a demon king. If there is anything to praise Ziref for, it's his ability to create such strong life in his subjects. Should we assign more help to the area? No need. Even with the losses taken, we still have the advantage. But keep an eye on Ishgar. On Ishgar, sir? Ziref's forces are almost depleted in the area. One final push will crush them once and for all. Ishgar may send forces out to ensure that happens. If they do, keep a watchful eye out with our scouts for where Ichigo is making his move at. You think he'll use the time to pull something? It is Ishgar's primary tactic. Use a distraction in one area to hide the true offensive happening elsewhere. They did it when they attacked Ziref, dividing his forces and fooling him into believing they wouldn't be attacking him anytime soon. They have no need to fight the demons anymore, even if it is to crush what remains of them, so if they do appear, it means they are trying to divert our eyes. Is there a chance we may be a target? Of course, Waiwak replied without hesitating. As much as I would love Ichigo to join us, I'm more than aware how unruly children can be. They love to rebel and will do until they are taught the consequences of doing so. He may try a rescue attempt, in fact, to try and rid me of my bargaining chips. Or he may ignore us entirely and focus on Baragan and his hollow army. They have been unusually quiet for hollows. Dangerously so. Should we prepare for them to attack us? Waiwak nodded. Keep a careful eye on them. Have our scouts report back even the slightest bit of movement or the tiniest sight that seems odd to them. I do not believe Baragan would sit on his throne and do nothing after preparing for this over the last few years. Patience will only get one so far. I will let them know, Jugram stated as he bowed his head. Is there anything else you require urgently? Little of consequence. As for Jugram looked up as the voice of his king trailed off, a crease across his brow at the sight of his king. The man had before been a symbol of confidence, not a hint of doubt in his words or his appearance about his actions or plans. But now? The man before him had halted speaking, a slight amount of confusion appearing in those eyes of his. He could only watch as his king brought up a hand to his chin, scratching it as if thinking of some unknown problem. Your Majesty. Giselle. She was captured 1 month ago if I remember correctly. Jugram nodded, confused at the sudden shift in topic. Yes. After her failed attempts to kill some of Ishgar's mages, she was taken in and imprisoned. She wasn't killed to the best of my knowledge. Unless. She just died, Waiwak replied, the words answering Jugram's unspoken question. Blood loss. Blood loss. That didn't add up. The 2 of them were aware of the many ways Giselle could actually be killed. It was a slightly difficult task, many would think, but it was possible once you knew exactly what dangers her ability posed and how to get around it. Ishgar, however, had no idea and had been afraid of accidentally releasing a zombie horde on them if they freed her accidentally in their attempts to kill her. Of all the ways she could die, however, blood loss was not one of them. Blood may have powered her ability, but it was not something that could kill her if she lacked it. She was already classified as dead, so many things that could be considered fatal weren't applicable to her. He could understand now why His Majesty looked confused. Giselle had died to something she could not die from. Is there anything in her memories? He asked hesitantly, cautious not to interrupt Wywak from his thoughts. Perhaps something in them would reveal what Ishgar did. They might have found a way to seal her power through some means which allowed them to kill her. She was starving, Wywak muttered quietly. Starving and actually feeling the consequences of such an action. Malnutrition. Again, a condition she should not have encountered. But there's something wrong here in her memories. Something wrong. There is almost nothing here. I recognized the soul, but when I look in her memories I cannot find anything before her time in the jail cell. Even her name is gone. It's like her memories have been ripped from her very soul, leaving her an empty husk of her former self. As if someone wanted to conceal something from me. From you. There is no need to wipe her memories like this unless they believed she could escape. And if they sealed away her ability, there would be no need to destroy these memories if she will die shortly after. Unless one assumes that information can still be leaked upon death. Leaked to Yuza by her power? Or to me? Wywak frowned as he leaned back into his throne. Someone knew that her soul would join me upon her death and knew that I would be able to see her memories. Was it someone on the Fiori War Council? Were they aware of my ability? Or was it Ichigo? He may have believed it was possible, knowing about what his fragment of my power can do. Your orders. Increase our defenses and strengthen the barrier surrounding us. The unknown is something I despise, so it is best for us to solve this mystery as soon as possible. Summon Yuzu here quickly and then assemble the remaining Sternritter present. It may only be a hunch, but I am rarely wrong in my beliefs. Something is coming. And it will be coming soon. Protector of the Fairies. Ichigo sat silently at the table as he waited for the others. A few were already present, Hibiki being the most obvious, with Shinji having appeared quite quickly afterwards. Nozomi had simply followed him and had taken the seat beside him, sparing a glance at him every few seconds to make sure he was still okay. Taoshiro and Karen had walked in not like after, both looking tired but much better than they had before. However, he noticed how Karen couldn't look at him for more than a few seconds without looking away, a mix of guilt and fear on her face. It seemed the image from earlier was still fresh in her mind. Mest and Mistogen finally entered a few minutes later, chatting quietly about something before immediately falling silent upon their arrival. Mistogen whispered a few final words to Mest before leaving him and rushing round to the other side of the table, taking the free seat to his left. Are you all right, sir? I'm fine, Mistogen, he responded, doing his best to wave away Mistogen's worries. The frown on his ally's face only seemed to deepen, so it appeared that Mistogen hadn't believed his words at all. Or maybe it was simply obvious that he wasn't fine and he couldn't see it. Is this going to be important? Came Uriu's voice as the man entered the room, Gray and Hades trailing behind him. They must have met up on the way. You don't usually call me for stuff like this so urgently. Generally you tell me and I chose whether to turn up or not. This is important, Ichigo replied simply. And your assistance will be needed here. Uriu shrugged, his eyes showing he didn't care much. Just get it over with. Who are we waiting on? That would be me, said Kisuke as he entered the room last. Sorry for the delay. A scientist's work is never done and I had a tricky experiment that I simply couldn't leave alone until it was stable, otherwise the whole ship might have been torn in two. None of them were sure if the man was joking or not, and Kisuke's smile didn't make it any easier. From the corner of his eye Ichigo could even see Hibiki discreetly checking a small screen he was trying to hide under the desk, as if wanting to confirm Kisuke's words. We're all here, Hibiki said after a moment, bringing his hands to the table and pressing them together. Ichigo, you called this meeting. That obviously means you have a plan of some kind. Ichigo nodded. It's pretty simple really. We're attacking Wywak. Silence fell at his words. No one was sure whether he was serious or not, since the idea itself sounded so ludicrous. And then. And here I thought you had something smart to say, Uriu replied. Attacking Wywak? I thought we've been over this before. To do so now would be foolish. If not now, then when? Right now we are in a strong position. Ziref's forces are almost gone, and Wywak has spread out his forces so much that they are weaker in many areas now. And with 2 battlefields open to him, his Sternritters need to be split up between the 2 when deployed. He is, right now, in a weaker position than he was before. And that will end shortly. Ichigo does have a point, Hades pointed out, folding his arms over his chest. There is no better time to strike. Unless you believe that another opportunity like this will show up if we give it time and let Wywak engage the Hollows or Alvarez. I don't think we'll see the same chance if we wait, Ichigo countered. Wywaka's forces will only decrease over time. And when Alvarez outnumbers him so heavily, it would be foolish to try and press any opening unless he is sure they have been dealt a crippling blow. That's why he moved in on Ziref in the first place. Because his army exposed a weakness before him. Forces-wise, I'm not sure Wywak appears to worry about such things, Hibiki pointed out, his brow crinkling into a frown as he went over the numbers in my head. His Quincy are strong. In terms of magical power, each has more than any other type of foot soldier from any other army. The Hollows are the only ones to come close, surpassing them in physical strength and power as a consequence. And then there is the number of Quincy. It's odd, right? Mentioned Mest. I saw this in the future myself, and it always struck us as odd how well organized the Quincy army was. They produced all their own uniforms, all their own weapons and focuses, built their own bases, but what always bothered us the most was not the how but the when. When did they manage to do all of this? When did they manage to prepare and hide all of this? And, what many have considered the most important, when did they recruit so many people to become Quincy without us ever catching a whiff of them? You mean you never knew how they built up their army? Asked Nozomi in confusion. Was their account done? A pretty vague one, done many times, and it was always inconclusive. We would get results that wouldn't match up, or results that would be right one week, wrong the next, and then right again the following week. It never made much sense to us. So we may or may not have other chances, stated Gray. Isn't that too much wishful thinking? If we miss our opportunity now, we may never get another one. But if we move too hastily, we may waste the only one we'll get to make, Uriah retorted with. Wywak will only ever give us one chance, because once we play our hand we have to win, or he'll make sure we never can try again. Our only advantage right now is that he still believes me to be an ally. If we make our move, I will have to show myself and reveal that I am against him. From there on out there won't be a shred of kindness or forgiveness from him. He won't stop until we are all dead. Out of curiosity, Kisuk slowly asked, what brought on this sudden change of heart, Ichigo? You were all for waiting before, seeing it as the path with the smallest risk to everyone involved. So why have you become so hasty? It may be stupid, but I don't think I can sit here any longer and pretend everything is fine. Because of the villages. Ichigo froze for a second, words caught in his throat, before nodding. Yes. Because of them. Emotions won't help with these decisions. I thought you already knew that. I do know that, Ichigo snapped back. But I saw exactly what I will become if I continue to rely solely on logic. I'll just turn cold and cut down whatever stands in the way of victory, no matter how innocent they may be or what fate awaited them. A cold version of yourself might be what is necessary for us to win this war, however, Hades offered. Without your morals, you could be a true monster to the enemy. Your speed and power surpass even Acknowledge when you use your full power. And if you are backed by enough men that is not a path we need to pursue, Mest declared, a hint of fury layered in his words. I saw the man you want Ichigo to be, and let me assure you that he is not what is necessary to win the war. He couldn't in the future like that, because if Ichigo becomes cold it means he is throwing away his reason to win, being carried forward by a sense of duty and nothing else. He would be fighting wishing to die. That was only your future. The future can be changed. And it can also end up being very similar to what it was originally if you don't change enough. I think Laxus is a clear indication of that currently. Enough. Ichigo shouted, stopping the argument before it could go any further. I'm sorry, but I can't be persuaded from this path any further. I'm going to rescue the others and get them away from Waiwaka's clutches. If you help me it will give them a better chance, but I'm not ordering this. If none of you will help I'll go alone. You won't be alone, stated Nozomi by his side, Mist Ogun nodding at her words himself. Nozomi is right. If you plan to storm the enemy's base, we'll be right by your side as you do so. Same here, Mest added. It's risky, but without risks we can't change the future. I'll take this chance. Thank you, Ichigo said softly before turning to the others. What about the rest of you? I know it'll be dangerous but dash. Finally. Karen's sudden outburst shot down anything he was about to say, his focus locked onto the absolutely giddy girl who could barely stop from leaping out of her seat in anticipation. I've been waiting for this. I'm in, no arguments. I've waited long enough for you to finally get off your arse and try and save Yuzu. There were reasons to wait, Karen, Toshiro reminded her before turning towards Ichigo. We'll be with you, no matter what. You can count on us. Thanks, Toshiro. You too, Karen. Turning to the others he asked, well. I don't like it, Kisuk stated. Too risky. Too much to lose. And too driven on emotion. But at the same time I cannot deny that we may have a chance. And I can see there is no stopping you. The best I can do as a result is help you succeed. You already know what I'll do, Gray said when Ichigo turned towards him. I'll do it. Just, don't let anyone fight near me if you can. I don't trust myself to not accidentally kill anyone here. I'll try, Ichigo replied, turning towards Uriah. He could see the Quincy was deep in thought, considering all the pros and cons and weighing them up in his head, but he had to know. What about you, Uriah? I should stay back, Uriah commented, almost unfocused on their conversation as he considered what the best choice to make was. Keeps our options open. If you only plan to rescue the hostages, then Waiwak is a smaller concern than he normally would be. I suppose that's a fair choice. Hades. I'll do what the majority does. Not like I have too much choice. You have some, but I'm glad to see you'll be joining us. Turning finally to Hibiki, he noticed how the man had fallen silent for a while now, simply staring at an archive screen in front of him. Hibiki. Sorry, Hibiki replied worriedly, reading the message once again as if afraid the words were false. Just had a surprising message. It appears the zombie girl Hades originally captured has died. What? 3 voices responded at once. Ichigo, Uriah, and even Mest had all jumped out of their seats and now had their hands slammed against the table. The others looked at them in confusion, assuming for the most part that their actions were a result of being surprised by the fact Giselle had died. Not all of them, however. What did you 3 do? Kisuk asked, already knowing that anything involving Uriah meant something secretive had been done. I know you lot did something, it's written on your faces. But what? I took away her memories, Mest supplied weakly. We had to be sure. Sure of what? Sure that she wouldn't remember even a trace of what we did, declared Uriah. Removing a portion of her memories may have made them susceptible to being recovered over time or effort from another's actions. We knew that if she died, her soul would go back to Waiwak and he would gain her power. So Waiwak has an army of zombies now at his disposal, muttered Gray. Great. Just great. Not quite, Ichigo pointed out hesitantly. We have an army of zombies. Not him. Come again. Gray wasn't the only one in shock. Many of them were, Shinji blinking a few times in disbelief before saying, you two did something with the power you got from Waiwak. That's why you needed to destroy all traces of her memories. So he wouldn't become aware that Uriah was involved at all. That's right, Uriah stated. We knew doing what we did would allow her to be killed easily, and that presented a potential risk to the plan we have to use against Waiwak when the time comes. So Mest got rid of the risk. We didn't kill her after that because we needed her alive, just so Waiwak wouldn't notice the lack of memories. And, pretty soon, he'll notice what he's also missing. The lack of power. We took it from her, Ichigo added, expanding on the story further. Together we have the ability to both absorb the power and permanently store it. I take it from her with the absorb and Uriah stores it away with the all. It requires us to work as one, since together the essence of our power, combined with our will, can overpower Waiwaka's own power. That's your plan to take down Waiwaka, isn't it? Hades muttered. You plan to use that advantage to strip him off his power. How fascinating. To bring down the man with the power he had thrown away for new strength. It's why we have only one chance. Once Waiwaka knows Uriu isn't his ally and has betrayed him, there will be no coming back. He will forcefully tear that power out of us, and a single will is not enough to overpower his. It's a one-in-a-lifetime chance that we have to make count. I'm in, Uriu suddenly said, all eyes turning towards him. If Waiwaka knows something has happened to Giselle, he will be wary, but he may have yet to suspect my involvement. But that can change over time. We need to act now to end this before he has a chance to think on things further. We'll need a distraction, Hibiki muttered, tapping away at the screens. The demon army. We'll make a push on them and the Quincy present and divide Waiwaka's attention briefly. Then we'll strike. You think that'll work? Ichigo asked curiously. Juoshiro might not agree. He will, Hibiki replied confidently, turning around one of the screens to reveal a small image on it. This was recorded 2 days ago and Juoshiro forwarded it to me yesterday to do some analysis when I had some time. From what my scans of the image did and the energy I'm reading from the area there, it's got only one match. Hell's Core. They're trying to rebuild it, muttered Gray in fear. They want to manually replenish their forces using it, so they are trying to bring it back. Can they do it? No idea. Seems possible. But either way, it gives us a real reason to attack. I think the Quincy might be especially likely to believe we are after something there if Kenpaku's Araki goes right after Mard Gear 2. He'll be the ultimate decoy for us to move in the shadow of Protector of the Fairies. Sneaking into the palace. And you remember what you need to do. Yeah, I know already. Yawning as he waited, Kenpaku stared at the barrier wall in front of him, waiting for it to drop. He wanted to get out there already, to charge the demon army before him and rip them all to shreds. Beside him, Byakuya did his best to not show his irritation at the man beside him and his lack of care about his responsibility. It was like it was all a game to him, the Devil Slayer purposefully charging head first into crowds of demons and leaving even his own allies behind at times in order to chase after strong opponents. If he had created more danger to them by doing that, he normally would have protested. But the fact of the matter was that Kenpaku was by far the greatest mage present when it came to fighting demons. The fairy tale mages also present came close at times, especially people like Natsu and Urza, but Kenpaku was still in another realm entirely when fighting, well, anything. But to see that much natural talent wasted by such a brute. He tried to swallow his frustrations with the man, however, knowing they had to work together for this mission to succeed. Kenpaku may have been able to break away and into the demon ranks many times before, but that never meant he got too far. Eventually their numbers alone would make him stop and hold his ground, unable to move further forward without the assistance he got from afar at keeping some of the demons from focusing on him. That was where he came in. His Bankai's widespread power would be the key to opening a hole up towards the enemy for Kenpaku to head through. The demons would be more desperate than ever to stop them, but they could do it. He still believed in that fact. Ready? He asked one final time, Kenpaku growling in annoyance. He noticed how the girl on his shoulder, Yachiru he believed she was called, was sticking her tongue out at him, but he did his best to ignore it. He had long stopped caring about the fact the man brought a little kid, possibly even his daughter, but he wasn't sure, since the man wouldn't listen no matter how many times he told him not to bring her. She could fight, at least, that he had learned through watching. In some ways she fought just like him, while other times she seemed different, more demon-like in her methods. He pushed all those thoughts away as the barrier opened up before them, Kenpaku rushing forward at the first sign of it with Yachiru hanging from his back for dear life while laughing with glee. Haha. Go Kenny. Hang on Yachiru. This is going to get wild. Purple lightning shot forward from Kenpaku's fist as he smashed into the first lines of demons, forcing his way through with sheer power and leaving any others staring at where he had been for a moment. Byakuya sighed as he stepped out of the barrier himself, his men following after him quickly and doing their best to spread out. The demons before them were slowly regrouping and he could see they were trying to close off Kenpaku's escape routes. They really did want him dead, he had found through watching the previous battles. Too bad this time they would be spared no quarter. Drawing his sword slowly from his sheath, he noticed how many of the demons around them had their eyes latching on him at the sight. It seemed they had learned about how dangerous he was. It had taken them long enough, but it did help him, as they normally never knew he was one to watch out for until it was too late. It would be a snap to wipe out the first few rows here with just his shikai, but there were more pressing matters. Tilting his wrist, he pointed his sword directly down towards the ground and let it drop. Demons rushed in at the action, the blade almost moving in slow motion to them in their fear, but it was far too late. As the blade sunk into the ground, it rippled like water, and from all around them rose larger blades in far greater quantities. Scatter, Senbon Zagara Keikyoshi. Every single one of the blades around them broke apart just like how they did with his shikai, creating thousands of tiny pink petal-like shards. At first it must have been a beautiful sight, the fragments scattering all around them and flowing through the air in the breeze. And then every demon around them fell to the ground, a bleeding mess from the hundreds of cuts they had all taken as the blades rushed past them. Raising a palm forward, Byakuya willed the blade fragments forward, directing his Bankai to funnel his attacks directly around Kenpei. They surrounded the Devil Slayer on all sides, much to Kenpei's dissatisfaction, but he was happy to see a fuss wasn't being kicked up as the man ran. His Bankai did its job well, clearing a path through the crowds of demons with ease and allowing Kenpei further access into their ranks, reaching areas he normally would have struggled to reach before. That was all he could do for him for now, however. Now they would have to push forward and try and keep up before he could afford to lend assistance once again. He could only spare so much of his Bankai before he would become too vulnerable, but hopefully he had gotten Kenpei far enough. "You are Byakuya Kukaki?" His ears picked up the voice of a woman he didn't recognize, turning towards the demon crowds to see a kimono-clad demon walking towards him, closing the book in her hands as she did so. "You've killed a lot of us. I think it's time to bring your story to an end." Protector of the Fairies. "The attack has begun," Hibiki told Ichigo through archive. "Shall we begin?" "We're already here, aren't we?" he asked in response, standing on the hull outside of the ship. "We're still hidden, right?" "For the time being. You can see the base clearly, right?" Ichigo nodded, staring down at the base of the Wandenreich. "Yeah. I can feel the energy coming from it too. They have one strong barrier in place. Would one blast from the ship's miniature Etherian cannon work?" "Maybe, but it may not break through all the way. And even if it does, we have to take into account the time it takes to charge up. You can dampen almost everything the ship gives off, but the cannon might be too much for it to suppress, and Waiwak will pick up even the slightest bit of magic given off that's too close. If we had traveled here with Nozomi's magic rather than taking the long route, then I'm sure we'd already be engaging fire with them down below." "Point taken. So then, how do we get in?" "From above it'll have to be brute force," Uriah said, listening in on their conversation. "Waiwak will undoubtedly sense something, but there won't be much choice." "Ichigo, how fast can you run?" "In Bankai." "Shikai?" "Not sure. Not anywhere close to the speed you probably want." "I thought so," Uriah muttered. "Perhaps. You got an idea?" "Maybe. We could always attempt to sneak in and keep the element of surprise. There is a way to get in under the barrier, but that is so long as Waiwak has no idea of this way in." "You have an alternative way in that Waiwak doesn't know about?" "How on earth did you build that under his nose?" "I didn't," came his reply. "My father did. After my mother died because of Waiwaka's actions, he began to hate magic. But none more so than the magic of Quincy. He didn't directly tell me about this tunnel, but he did leave me clues and hints towards it. I don't really know how much he knew about my actions and plans. I like to think he knew very little of it, but anyway, it should still be secret, I hope." "Great. How do we get there? And where does it lead to?" "You see the forest in the distance?" Ichigo nodded. "There. There's a large tree with a hollowed-out base. I'll show you once we get close. As for where it leads to, I don't know. I couldn't risk it at the time because it was too dangerous to be caught wherever I ended up and not have an excuse ready. It could bring us out in the yard, in the barracks, in the assembly hall, or even in the throne room. So it's up to chance mostly. It's the best chance we have in my opinion, Uriah said confidently. Trust me on that. All right, I will. Just a few of us will go that way through. The rest will stay on the ship and attack from above when ready. We might even be able to bring the barrier down from the inside to make everyone's job that bit easier. Hibiki, can you let everyone know? Informing them now, replied Hibiki. Some of the others want to know who is going with you. Karen is insisting. That's a word for it. Tell her she can go if Taoshiro tags along to keep an eye on her. Just make sure everyone has one of Kisuk's magic suppressing cloaks. If we'll infiltrating like this too, Gray and Kisuk should come too. We may be able to find the barrier and we'll want people ready to either disable that or completely neutralize it. No Hades. He'll be better suited to striking from above and making a lot of noise when the time is right. Very well. I'll let the others know. Best of luck to you. From here on out we'll maintain radio silence so it can't be picked out away from the protection of the ship and the barriers around it. Be careful out there. Protector of the Fairies. Yawning as she opened her eyes, Wendy rubbed them a few times as she tried to rid herself of the tiredness she still felt. She hadn't slept well last night and the nightmares she tended to have her weren't the most enjoyable. Last night was the worst however. She had felt the shift in the magic around her even in her sleep and the souls of the dead she had heard hadn't let her rest peacefully. Tough night. Gildarts asked her from his corner of the room, a weary smile across his face. You looked like you were in pain. More so than usual. A lot of people died, Wendy whispered, Gildarts having to struggle to pick up her words. Most of them I think were the enemy but there was a small group screaming terrible things, aimed at one person. Ichigo. Don't worry about it Wendy. Our enemies will always hate us if we beat them. But they didn't feel like they were enemies. Gildarts didn't know what to say to that. The idea in itself was a worrying thought as it left the question of who Ichigo had caused to hate him so much on their deathbeds. Do you think? He knew what she was asking him and he wanted to lie. But lying wasn't something he felt very comfortable doing to her in this situation. The only ones they could count on were each other which made it even more important that they could trust one another. But she was still so young and he knew she looked up to Ichigo a bit. We don't know, he settled for in the end. Maybe he killed them, maybe he promised to save them and failed. Either way, that can't be changed. And I have faith it was for the right reason. I know it was for the right reason, Wendy replied, sounding almost insulted that he had insinuated otherwise. I'm just curious why it happened and what he actually did. Well, I'm sure we'll find out eventually, Gildarts said, cracking another smile. I feel like my health has been returning far faster than before. Pretty soon I'll break us both out of here and we can go catch up with him. You won't be able to do it, Wendy tried to say quietly but he still heard it anyway, giving her a pointed look. Look, she muttered as she raised the chains around her wrists, showing off the very thing keeping most of their magic sealed away and unable to be accessed. I doubt we can do much with these on. We'll find a way, he replied, a wide smile on his face as he did so. I'm sure of it. After all, I am Dash. The guild's ace, I know, Wendy muttered, a slight smile on her face at the words despite the situation they were in. Gildarts had told her this line countless times before and she knew it was his way of imbuing confidence and hope in her. The latter was unnecessary though, because you realize Ichigo will rescue us in time, right? Gildarts looked at her in surprise for a moment, his smile wavering. You haven't yet given up on that, have you? No. Why? Gildarts sighed, purposefully not answering her. He had realized a while back that rescue was not likely to come any time soon. Their safety was apparently guaranteed, their freedom another matter. And from what he had heard from guards when they were being in a talkative mood, especially that black-haired girl, Ichigo had been heavily focused on Zeref for a while and had then fallen back into a passive state. He did not know when Ichigo would have a chance to strike at this place yet, so it could be a great while longer for them. Wendy, however, had never wavered in her thoughts. The idea that Ichigo would come for them hadn't been removed from her thoughts even once. It made him wonder if she even realized that whenever she ranted about how Kelia was so focused on Wiwak that she was the same with Ichigo. It wasn't quite to the same degree, though he guessed Kelly's sanity played a big role in how she acted, but it was there. Wendy didn't consider the idea Ichigo would abandon them because she believed he would come for them without doubts. He hadn't dared bring that up though. Wendy and Kelly's relationship as of right now was strained to say the least. Every time they talked Wendy tried to be civil, but it eventually broke down when Kelly started trying to convince her to change sides. Turncoat was one of the nicer ways Wendy had described Kelly as, other ones he wasn't quite comfortable with her knowing at this age. At the very least they hadn't argued much recently, but that was in part due to Kelly's slowly increasing gaps between her trips down here. Now they were lucky to see her once every 3 days, and give it another month and they might not even see her once a week. There was one part that he disliked though about her lack of presence. Information. Guards talked, but Kelly talked so much more, and sometimes about very private things too, such as plans and messages being exchanged. He wondered if Wywak even knew she was saying such stuff, perhaps not even caring because they couldn't do anything with such information while in the state they were in. The information always made him happy to learn of what was going on, but sad for what was also happening, especially with Ichigo's sister, Yuzukuro Saki. He had met her a few times since being trapped here, and she had always tried to bring a bit of help such as medicine or food, even though they were treated fairly well for prisoners. He hadn't said that to her though because she seemed so happy to help them and the dark shadows under her eyes showed she was suffering as much as they were. But recently she had stopped coming, and from what he had heard she had gotten much friendlier with the other Quincy present. It worried him to say the least. He wouldn't say he was an expert at mental manipulation and pretending to switch sides. He was too straightforward for that kind of stuff, so a lot of the talk around it normally flew over his head. But he remembered from his youth snippets Kisuk had said, only remembering them because it was the man himself who had told him them. The general consensus was that it was extremely difficult. Few could try and pretend to fake what side they belonged to, and those that could generally fell into 2 categories. The first were those who were able to do whatever it took to achieve their goals and could sacrifice any morals to do so. They could act as an enemy and play their part because they were so detached from most that it was easy for them to do as such. The second, however, was more worrying. It was where one tried to pretend but ended up slowly being turned without realizing it, till eventually they were actually on the side they had pretended to be a part of. He really hoped the latter wasn't happening right now, but his brief conversations with the girl told him everything he needed to know. Gildarts. He broke out of his thoughts as he heard Wendy's voice call out to him. The girl turned away and looking at the furthest wall from the 2 of them intensely. Something's coming. Something? You seeing anything? Wendy frowned, her head tilted slightly in thought. Not quite see. But the magic around us is restless. Is it Ichigo? No, it would be far more restless if he was here. But there is something odd here. Is it a threat? Wendy shrugged. I don't know. I don't recognize them, but magic is really restless. I saw something like this before, with the dragons, but this is different still. Like something else is approaching. Something that isn't quite Nook and yet not human. And you have no ideas what it could be? He asked hopefully, that emotion dropping in place of dread when Wendy turned to face him. Her expression had gone colder with a hint of uncertainty in her eyes from her own words. Wendy. There's one thing it could be, she said quietly, so quietly he had to move closer to hear. The closest similarity I can find to it is a certain branch of magic. This thing. I think it's a god. Protector of the fairies. So this is it, Ichigo muttered, looking at the large tree before them. It was similar in appearance to most, with the only exception being the roots at the base. They were far denser than most, and the space around this tree compared to the others was far greater. And you're sure this is the safest route we can take? It appears to be, Uriah replied, pulling his cloak, hiding his magical power closer to his body as a chill swept through in the air. The tree itself looks to be still in good condition, only harmed by the elements. It means that, at least on this end, the passageway has remained undisturbed. So it's 50% safe then, Gray pointed out, doing his best to not subconsciously remove the cloak he had been given. The cold didn't bother him in the slightest with his immunity to it, and his old habits were hard to suppress, making it difficult to manage. Better than knocking on the front door really. Let's go already, Karen said impatiently, tapping her foot against the ground repeatedly as Uriah crouched forward beside the roots of the tree. We're wasting time here. What if those Quincy manage to pick up on something? If they do, I doubt it'll be us, responded Uriah, slowly pulling at a few of the roots as if testing their strength. Besides, this isn't an easy task. I need to find the roots my father weakened all those years ago. Your father weakened? Wait, find them? You mean this is the first time you've gone this way? Unfortunately, yes. Momentarily glancing away from his work, Uriah caught a glance of the looks of disbelief being shot towards him. Magical means around this tunnel would have given off a small sign. A sign Wywak would have easily discovered within minutes of arriving back here. This is his home, you have to remember. He knows every single bit of magic layered around it, and even the slightest difference within the compound would be grounds for observation. As such, this tunnel had to be made to last using only physical means, including the entrances. How interesting, Kisuk inputted, crouching down beside the roots himself as he gave some of them a few test pokes. So rather than hide this tunnel in an elaborate manner, your father relied on the advantages of the natural world. In which case it means that if hidden well it would never be discovered with the means Wywak was taking. But as a result it means that you cannot hide the evidence once accessed. If you pull away the roots guarding the entrance you can't replace them without magic, and that will send an alert right back to Wywak if you do so. It's a one-time use plan, specifically for a moment of your choice. Exactly. Poking at a final root, Uriah wrapped his hand around it and began to pull it up. Don't just stand there, he stated angrily as he watched the others making no move to help him. Cut it away or something. Only had to ask, Ichigo said, crouching down and carefully slicing away the root with Zanjutsu's smaller blade. The root came up clean in Uriah's hands, quickly discarded to one side as he began directing Ichigo towards the others to cut. This one, that one end. Yep, that should do it. With the few roots cut away they could now see the opening of a way down, the ground not visible through the pitch darkness present. Light will be the major problem, but the tunnel itself should be a straight route. We just need to stumble around a bit in the dark and do our best to stay quiet. Turning away from the others he peered further down into the hole. Looks like it's going to be bothersome. Who wants to go first? His answer was a kick from behind, Karen pushing him down with a smirk. She felt a whack on her head for her troubles before Ichigo leapt down into the hole after Uriah, Kisuk following shortly after while chuckling. You want to go next? Karen asked Gray as she turned towards him, the man shaking his head. You go first. Taoshiro, you go next. I'll wait a second and then last. I'll be bad if I land on anyone. My skin is dangerous. All right. Suit yourself. Karen quickly leapt down into the hole, Taoshiro waiting a few moments before leaping down after her, leaving Gray to himself for a moment as he counted down from 10. Happy that it would have been enough time for the others to begin to move, he began to take a step towards the hole when he froze, his head snapping back round. Was someone there? He thought he felt something for a moment and yet he couldn't see anyone. Had he imagined it? Taking a step away from the hole towards the source of the noise, he tried to get a closer look when a hand suddenly slammed into him, sending him flying back and into the hole behind him. He had just a second to hear the chuckling coming from above, definitely a woman's voice, before darkness completely filled his vision. The hole down wasn't entirely vertical, it seemed. He found himself getting pulled down a sort of slide as he continued to fall, slowly leveling out till he found himself off the tilted ground he had been on and suddenly floating in the air. A second later and he hit the ground, having reached what had to have been his destination. And, surprisingly, there was light here. You okay, Gray? He heard Ichigo ask him, but he wasn't listening at the moment, his focus too busy taking in the crystals layering the walls. They were beautiful, varying in shapes and size, and all of them seemed to radiate light from them as if responding to their presence. What is this? Beautiful, right? It was Kisuk who answered him, the man standing closely by one of the crystals and brushing a hand across it. In response the crystal began to glow brighter, almost blinding them before Kisuk pulled his hand away. I've encountered a few shards of this stuff back in my day with the Magic Council. Ligerant. A natural type of lacrima that actively absorbs magic and releases it back out as light. It's normally barely visible half the time, just amounting to a dim, since it can't absorb much magic from the air. But that all changes when a living creature approaches. The presence of natural life causes a shift in the amount of magic present in the nearby area, if very slight, and the crystal manages to leech off the magic creatures like us emit passively and brightens as a result. It's really a fascinating type of mineral. Extremely rare too. How did you father even find a small amount, let alone this much? I don't know, Uriah stated honestly. He never mentioned anything like this to me. Though, he did once give my mother a present when I was younger. I don't quite remember the memory that much, but I remember the item itself. My father still has it, hidden in the drawer of his desk. It was a necklace, made of the purest silver, with a gem one could describe as pure light in the middle. To have so much that he could even waste some as a gift, Kisuk muttered as he stepped away from the crystals. I do wish I knew where he found all this. And how no one else learned of such a find when he did. He either found one massive deposit, hidden for years, or he spent years searching for all this just for this one plan. He sighed, shaking his head. Questions I will have to pester him on later. This solves the lighting issue. Raising a hand, he gestured forward down towards the dim crystals in the distance, the only path available to them. Shall we? Hold on a second, Gray said before anyone could make a move further away, drawing their eyes towards him. He quickly got back to his feet, carefully making sure his gloves were still on securely and that his cloak hadn't come loose, before speaking. We may have trouble. I was pushed down here. Impossible, Uriah responded with immediately, disbelief in his voice. I sensed no one. They might have been suppressing their power. I sensed no one, Uriah repeated. Trust me when I say that if I can't sense them, then they either have cloaks like ours, something I doubt unless they can replicate Kisuk's work. He paused for a second, looking at Kisuk for clarification until the man shook his head. Or they were not there. Did you see anyone? Gray shook his head. No. But I felt someone push me. I heard a noise before I followed you guys, made a move to look and then was pushed in before I could do so. Someone, or something, was watching us. And it sounded female too. They must have seen the tunnel, Ichigo muttered, glancing at Uriah. And you're sure this place was unknown? As much as I can be, Uriah replied, crossing his arms. At the very least there is no possibility of retreating up. We have to assume this is the only way forward and that the possibility exists that it could be known. It's the best chance we have. All right then, stated Kisuk as he took the first few steps down the path. Here's to hoping. The others began to follow, but the thoughts of those that could have been behind them never left their minds for long, least of all Gray's. Every so often he would glance back over his shoulder, only the dim of the lights in the distance able to confirm to him that no one was indeed there. He was still half tempted to freeze the path and block it off as a precaution, but that would be too noticeable in terms of magical power. Even so, he did have to restrain himself a few times from removing his gloves and touching the walls every time a noise surprised him. Uriah, he spoke up, causing the Quincy to turn to face him as they walked. You said they weren't there. But you seem to believe too that someone was there. Don't they counter one another? You'd be surprised, Uriah replied, pushing the bridge of his glasses further up his nose. A script can do a lot of things. It is not a stretch to believe that the possibility exists that one can remove its wielder from the perception of others, both in magical power and in sight itself. A power for an elaborate game of hide and seek, you could say. So for all we know they could be following after us without us even being aware of it. Could they suppress their magical power enough that these crystals won't pick them up? Not possible, Kisuk answered for Uriah. We are wearing these cloaks, but that isn't enough to stop these crystals from lighting up. They are probably the most effective means of security if you just want to know if someone is near them or not. You're right to keep checking behind us though. If the area gets brighter in the distance, it means someone is. Kisuk paused, his eyes narrowing as he moved his Zanpakuto out from under his cloak. Following us. Run! Exclaimed Uriah, the others needing no further pressing from him to do so. They all sprinted down the hall, not caring much for the noise they might make when the enemy was right on their tail. As they ran, Kisuk quickly slashed out behind them with his drawn sword, destroying some of the crystals in an attempt to dim the light in their area and to slow down the enemy's progress. It was the best they could do without magical means, and they couldn't risk using it yet unless there was no alternative. "I think I see something up ahead," called out Gray, a hand held forward towards the site. "Is that a wall?" "Entrance has to be covered up," replied Uriu immediately. "Can't get around it now. We'll have to hope this magic is kept hidden enough for us to keep moving." "Ichigo." "Got it," Ichigo said, rushing past the others and slamming a hand against the wall the second he reached it. "Absorb." The entire wall broke into pieces of magic, hovering in the air for a brief moment before the energy was sent scattering around them as they all rushed through it. Ichigo quickly turned back as the last person passed, his hand held out towards the space before saying one word. "Restore." The energy immediately pulled back into its original shape, blocking the path behind them and leaving no signs that it had ever been disturbed. "Nice trick," muttered Karen as she stared at the wall. "When did you learn to do that?" "Not that long ago. Not very practical in a fight for the most part though. Takes too much concentration and requires more time than I get. Should make those chasing us pause for a bit, wondering where we went. Let's not be here when they decide to check through here. Mr. Ishida will have to be the one to lead us through then," said Kisuk, gesturing towards him in an overly joyful manner. "If you would." "I know already," Uriu replied, glancing around where they had ended up. "I don't recognize this area much. Means it's low down, somewhere I had little reason to be at while playing my role. Waiwak will be up with the barrier's core, while the prisoners are close by. Should we split up and cover more ground? It'll be difficult to rescue the prisoners later on once we're known, and time is not something we have a lot of." "I'll go get Yuzo," Karen declared quickly. "Which way is it? Will you stay quiet or do you need an escort?" She glared at him in response. "Escort it is." "Toshiro, would you?" "Let me," offered Kisuk. "There is no telling what methods the Quincy here used to keep their prisoners here unknown to you that we may need to disable. But the barrier dash. Our entry will not go unnoticed for long. Ichigo's little show there was small, but you told us about Waiwaka's capabilities yourself. How long do we have?" Uriu frowned for a moment, one hand resting under his chin. 5, maybe 4 minutes being truly honest. The only reason it's that long is because it may take him a while to realize Ichigo is here. That small burst could very well be registered to him as his own magic, which will make him pause briefly, unsure whether or not it was really his magic at work. "Can we make it to him in time?" Uriu paused for a second, considering the matter before shaking his head. "No. Not if we want to continue to remain undetected. No matter what we try, Waiwak will know that Ichigo is here before we can reach him." "Then let's change our priorities," stated Ichigo as he clapped his hands together to draw their attention. "Our presence should continue to remain undetectable even if he becomes aware of us. With that in mind, we should all stick together for the time being until we can confirm the state of Yuzo, Gildarts, Wendy, and Kelia." "Can we spare the time?" Gray asked. "What about the enemy behind us?" "Not much we can do about them without lighting up our position to every Quincy nearby. We have to prioritize targets for the time being anyway. Waiwak isn't going anywhere. It might even make it easier for us if he sends out his forces to search for us. They'll be scattered, less focused except perhaps around him and the barrier itself." "Better move quickly then," Kisuk pointed out, gesturing at the wall behind them. "Let's not wait for our friends to join us." Hurrying away from the corridor they were in, they continued through the underground tunnels, following after Uriu, who seemed to pause every few moments as he confirmed their location. He would always glance around a few times, eyeing the different turns they could take and the position of certain bits of decoration, before running with confidence once again. "You're sure you know the way?" Karen asked when they stopped for the 5th time. "You're checking an awful lot." "I know my way between locations, but I generally need to know where I started from," Uriu replied back sharply. "Most of the corridors here look exactly the same, perfectly imitating their copies above. Without knowing the exact floor and location, I had to keep checking to narrow down my idea of our current position." "And?" any closer to figuring it out. We're either going to see the entrance to the jails in the next turning or what? Or find the doors to the mess hall. There is a path like this that leads to it without any windows, so I can't be sure which one we are in. You better hope it's not the latter. What do you want me to do about it? Uriah snapped back, leading them round the final turning before they came face to face with the corridor he wanted. There we are. Seeing Karen about to rush ahead, he held out an arm in front of her, blocking her path before she could lose her head in her excitement. Wait a moment. Wait. It's right there. I know, but hold on a minute. There is something you all will need to be aware of before you go charging in blindly. Something you couldn't have mentioned before now. Gray asked, Uriah only shrugging in response. Slipped my mind. Plus, information is best hidden when it is known to as few people as possible. Helps keep reactions honest. You have allies in here, don't you? Kisuk said, his eyes showing that he had already worked it out. Allies not loyal to Wywak but to you. Yes. The best way to not compromise them was to make you all think they were enemies so you would fight them as such. If they died. Well, I trusted them enough to stay alive. How many? Karen asked, her eyes narrowing. If you had allies in here, then why didn't we attack ages ago? How many allies do you have in here? The number isn't important. How many? Uriah glanced away, pushing the bridge of his glasses up with one hand as he tried to avoid looking at any of them. One. Keep your voice down. Uriah snapped back at her. And yes, one. It's not easy getting allies in this place. It's one thing to rebel, it's another to rebel against Wywak. I only got her on my side because I found her first and managed to convince her of the danger Wywak would pose. When we make our move, she'll know to blow her cover at the same time and help us out any way she can. You warned us of this now before we could charge in, Ichigo pointed out, glancing down the hallway towards where the cells would be beyond. Your ally is in there, isn't she? Not as a prisoner, don't worry, Uriah quickly reassured them all, seeing the doubts on their faces. She isn't. She's too valuable to Wywak to be made into a prisoner for one slight failure. But if I know what Wywak is like, she's probably been demoted to a prisoner guard half the time as punishment for losing me. She got a name? Gray asked, Uriah looking away once again. What's the matter? Her name can't be that dash. Bambietta Bastertine, Uriah said quickly, glancing at the others from the corner of his eye. Most of them showed little recognition, but that wasn't the case with Ichigo and Kisuk. Mistogin had told them about her if he remembered correctly. Yes, the same girl who killed all those rune knights on Tenro Island and the one who almost killed Mistogin. You sure she's an ally? Ichigo asked suspiciously, Uriah sighing as he nodded. It may not seem like it, but her heart is in a good place. When she's not exploding things. To be perfectly honest, she's only tied to us by the fact Wywak's perfect world would remove the chaos she loves to be a part of. That's all really, but it's enough for someone like her to side with us, provided that we have the means to stop him. She wouldn't do this if she thought there was no chance that we could win. And she's the only one you could get to join us. Allies in here are scarce, Uriah muttered. But at least she stands on our side. Trust me, there were far worse people out there I could have tried to recruit. Well, let's Bambietta is honest with her obsessions. Be thankful you never met Pepe. Protector of the fairies. Far above the army of demons and humans, a single entity looked down on them all. The man looked through the small crack he had opened up and peered out of his hidden dimension, a frown across his face at the sight of it all. What purpose does this solve? Yukio asked, frowning at the sight of all the chaos. He couldn't quite work out what Master Zeref attempted to achieve by leaving them all to ruin like this. When he had showed up they had all been filled with hope, but then he left, taking only Jackal with him, and leaving the rest of them here to rot. He found it hard to understand why they continued this futile fight as a result. It was obvious Master Zeref had lost interest in them. Mardgear knew the same, but the other demons' response had been to chase back after what they lost, hoping that by recreating the resurrection system that it would also bring Master Zeref back to them. He didn't believe that. Hell's Core wasn't even that important to Master Zeref in the grand scheme of things. But the library that belonged to him. That was another matter entirely. They had failed to protect it. Tartaros had been created for that very purpose, and they had failed that in the worst way possible. Not a single book was gone, nor were they destroyed. The knowledge had not been tampered with, nor had it been lost. But what had happened was that the sanctuary their leader came to for peace and quiet was now gone, forever lost to him so long as the ice that sealed the books remained. And that was why he knew Master Zeref wasn't coming back for them. Whatever goal Master Zeref had with Jackal, he knew in his heart that it wasn't because he cherished Jackal more than them, but because Jackal had a power suitable for whatever plan he had been putting into action. They used to know such plans, but they hadn't heard a word from Master Zeref before that day in a month, having to settle for obeying Mardgear's commands. He didn't like it. Obeying Mardgear was not a task he enjoyed, but he did it for the sake of their forces. There had to be a chain of command and a leader at the top, and that role could not be occupied by two devil kings. Even so, he didn't like it. It was hard to work out what part of him disliked the idea the most. His demon side hated it because of its pride, unwilling to want to bow down to one supposed to be his equal. It was only because what little remained of his humanity could temper his pride and reason with what to do and what would be best. That same human side, though, would keep drifting into thoughts he didn't like. Thoughts where he truly felt betrayed by their abandonment. And that was wrong, his demon side would always point out. Such emotions were for beings not bound to the will of Master Zeref. He should not feel such a thing. And yet he did. Feeling his humanity was dangerous. He only had to look as far as Deliura, ruled by the side of him that had been called Grey, to know that Yukio the human was dangerous to his loyalty, calling it into question and even going as far as to consider Kiza's actions as acceptable. He quickly squashed those thoughts. In the end, he was the Mist King, and that was all that mattered. Human feelings on the matter held little sway over him, and he refused to give them any footholds to grab onto. All that mattered was helping the one who gifted him such power in the first place, the man who had picked him up from the gutter when he had nothing. "You're on your own, Mardgear," he stated quietly as his dimension closed off once again. "If we want Master Zeref to be truly happy, we shouldn't be aiming here. He doesn't care for the people here." Smiling to himself, one filled with his conflicting emotions of sadness and viciousness, he let his dimension move across the earth, searching for the only people who could truly be their targets to gain back Zeref's approval. If you want to catch his attention, you need to focus on the matters that are important to him. You need to fulfill his desires. And you know as well as I do what Zeref desires right now. These people don't matter, but a small group of mages elsewhere do. Protector of the Fairies. Check the description for the links to the author.